Chapter 82. Old Ma said. Big brother, poor people also have dignity. They also need to live. Lu Qin snorted and said, living is living. Who are you trying to fool with all that extravagant talk? Old Ma said seriously, although we are poor, we also need to have dreams, right? If you think about this place better, you will feel that this place is really not bad. Lu Qin shook his head and was speechless. He turned around and shouted, Atsu! Atsu barked and ran over, following Lu Qin and Old Ma inside. This house was actually not too small. It had 2 entrances, facing the street. Well, facing the alley was a front hall. Old Ma had made a counter. It seemed that he wanted to make it look like a shop. Behind it was a small courtyard. It was not big, but it was square, with a walkway on both sides. There were 2 more rooms at the back. They were not too big, but they were enough for people to sleep in. Hey, it's not bad. Lu Qin said to Old Ma. Old Ma immediately became happy. He laughed and said, I'm not wrong, am I? It's barely okay to live here, but forget about doing business. You won't be able to make a lot of money. Lu Qin stood in the barren courtyard and casually said, I just need to plant some rocks, grass, and 2 trees here. That should do it. Get lost. I don't have money to waste on those boring things. Lu Qin laughed and did not care. He asked casually, you just said that there are big families living in the city nearby. Old Ma scratched his head and said, oh, actually it's not too close. It's about 2 streets away. Over there is the gathering place of the old mansions of the influential families in the city. Quite a few of them have close relationships with the Kunlun party, whether overtly or covertly. Lu Qin nodded. This was also a matter of course. Kunwu City was at the foot of Kunlun Mountain, and with such a huge Kunlun party entrenched here, no matter who it was, they would want to curry favor with this incomparably huge thigh. Old Ma walked into the inner room, opened one of the rooms, and said, you can stay here for now. When the immortal's side is ready, I will arrange for you to enter the Kunlun party directly. Lu Qin nodded and said, all right. At nightfall, Kunwu City gradually quieted down. The night breeze swept by and the lights of tens of thousands of households were lit. In an inconspicuous corner of the city, in a small house in a shabby alley, Old Ma and Lu Qin moved a small table and placed it in the courtyard. Then they each sat on a stool, brought a pot of wine, 2 cups, and 3 plates of side dishes, and chatted in the courtyard. A cold moon hung high in the night sky, its faint light sprinkling down, bestowing the small courtyard with a bit of light. However, under the eaves of the surrounding houses, there was only darkness. In the shadows, like a ghost, Atsu poked its head out of the dark corner of the corridor and carefully looked around. Then it wagged its tail and sniffed around the small courtyard before sneaking to a corner to pee. Only then did it run back to Lu Qin's side, stretched its body, and lay down at Lu Qin's feet. Lu Qin casually picked up a chicken foot from the plate and tossed it over. Atsu didn't even get up. It just stretched its neck forward and caught it in one bite. Then it leaned against Lu Qin's feet and began to happily chew on it. Old Ma glanced at Atsu and said, when you go up the mountain in a few days, what about this black dog? Lu Qin picked up the wine pot and poured some wine into his cup. He said, I'll leave it with you for now. Once I settle down at the Kunlun party, I'll see if I can bring it up the mountain. Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, the spirited mountain of Kunlun is the world's #1 paradise. There are all kinds of celestial and auspicious beasts on the mountain. How can you bring a lame dog up there? Lu Qin rubbed his chin and said thoughtfully, now that you mention it, I suddenly remember that when I was risking my life outside in the past, when I was in danger at the gates of hell, I had eaten quite a lot of the flesh and blood of the various demonic beasts. Only these legendary spiritual beasts of the immortals have never been seen before. Old Ma's face darkened. He glared at Lu Qin and said, hey, you haven't even gone up the mountain and you're already thinking about whether the meat of the spiritual beasts on the mountain tastes good or not. That's not very good. Lu Qin smiled and said, I was just thinking about it. Old Ma looked at him suspiciously and said, "But why do I feel like you're up to no good?" "TSK, what a villain." Lu Chen threw away the topic disdainfully and said, "How's the current situation in the Kunlun party? Tell me about it." Old Ma nodded and said, "Now the huge Kunlun mountain range is already under the control of the Kunlun party. The spirited mountain range is continuous and undulating. Over the past thousands of years, countless immortal caves have been opened. But the most important place is the so-called spring, summer, autumn, and winter peaks between the sky and clouds. They are in the depths of Kunlun and are suspended above the mountains. They are the world's #1 wonders. Legend has it that they were created by the fall of a star 5,000 years ago." Lu Chen nodded and said, "I've also heard of the 4 floating peaks between the sky and clouds. Although I haven't seen them with my own eyes, I think they must be amazing wonders." Old Ma said, "Not only that, it is said that the spiritual power on the 4 floating peaks is more than 10 times that of the mortal world. It is a natural holy land for cultivation. In the Kunlun party, except for the 2 perfected deity transformation, it is said that only Yuanying Jinren is qualified to set foot on these 4 strange peaks." Lu Chen raised his glass and clinked it with Old Ma's. He said with a smile, "I wonder if we will have the chance to go up and see in the future." Old Ma shrugged and said with a smile, "I think we will have the chance to stand on the ground and look up for a few times." Lu Chen laughed and drank the wine in his glass. Then he said, "Tell me about those sections." Old Ma pondered for a moment and said, "Nowadays, there are many heroes in the cultivation world. Although the Kunlun party can't be said to be second to none, it is still one of the top 5 sections. There are indeed many heroes in the sect. However, after you enter the sect in the future, you still have to pay attention to one thing." At this point, his voice slightly lowered. He said, "The Kunlun party has been passed down to this day, and its orthodoxy has never been broken. However, there were 2 founders in the past, Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo. Therefore, the orthodoxy that has been passed down over the years is actually divided into 2 factions. One is called Kuanji, and the other is called Tieji." Lu Chen frowned and said, "Why, these 2 factions don't get along?" Old Ma said, "They are harmonious on the surface, but not on the inside." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Could it be that they are secretly scheming against each other?" "Not at all." Old Ma smiled and said lightly. Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then he said with a smile, "Oh, this is strange." Old Ma said, "There is nothing strange about it, because the Tieji branch of the Kunlun party has been on the decline for many years. On the contrary, the Kuanji branch is growing stronger day by day. The 2 great perfected gods of the current Kunlun party, Tianlan and Bai Chen, are both from the Kuanji branch. Among the 19 Yuanying perfected ones, 15 are from the Kuanji branch. What do you think?" Lu Chen said, "Oh, I see. No wonder the Tieji branch wants to tuck their tails between their legs." Old Ma laughed and said, "Who says it isn't? Originally, the Kuanji and Tieji legacies were divided equally among the spirited mountain of Kunlun. Not to mention other things, just the 4 strange peaks in the sky and clouds were 2 on each side. But now perfected Lord Tianlan has 1, Hakushin Jinkuan has 1, and the remaining 2 have been occupied by the 15 Yuanying perfected ones. If you were a disciple of the Tieji branch, what would you do?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said with a smile, "Why not rebel?" Chapter 83. Old Ma spat and looked at Lu Chen with disdain. He said, "Do you think you can rebel just because you say so? It's easy for you to say that." Lu Chen laughed and poured wine into their glasses again. He said, "Then what do you think we should do?" Old Ma said sternly, "If I were a disciple of Taiji's lineage, I wouldn't be able to defeat the Kuanji who have the advantage in numbers. Then I might as well admit defeat and behave myself. Besides, the 2 of us are saying alarmist words here. In fact, in the Kunlun party, the 2 groups of disciples may not really be like fire and water. No matter what, they are still Kunlun disciples of the same sect and ancestor. They just have some disputes on ordinary days. How big of a deal can it be?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said, what you said makes sense. Perhaps in another 200 or 300 years, the tables will turn. At that time, the iron branch's strength will suddenly soar, suppressing the Kunji branch. Old Ma laughed and said, isn't that so? Who knows what will happen in the future? Let's drink, let's drink. The two of them clinked their glasses and made a crisp sound. The black dog lying under the table looked up and then lowered its head to gnaw on the bone. Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen and said with a smile, speaking of which, in a few days, I may go up the mountain to become a Kunlun disciple. At that time, everything will naturally be arranged by that person. I think he will not treat you too badly. Oh yes, as a disciple, it doesn't matter which branch you belong to. The most important thing is to be well informed and convenient. Lu Chen interrupted Old Ma's speech and said, you go tell the damn baldy that I want to be in Kunji. If he dares to put me in Tieji, I will kill his oxen. Pfft. Cough, cough, cough. Old Ma suddenly choked and coughed on the spot. There are a lot of influential clans in Kunwa City, and most of them are the descendants of experts who have achieved the Tao in the Kunlun party for several thousand years. They have been passed down from generation to generation, and they are inextricably linked to the Kunlun party. Old Ma pointed to the north and said, these big families and clans have two biggest advantages. First, they follow the Kunlun party wholeheartedly and become its claws, teeth, and eyes. I don't dare to say far away, but within a radius of 2,000 miles from Kunwa City, nothing can escape the Kunlun party's grasp. Second, over the years, almost all the outstanding talents in these big families and clans have entered the Kunlun party's tutelage, and many outstanding talents have emerged from them. Lu Chen nodded. Suddenly, he frowned and said, according to you, we can't hide from the Kunlun party's spies even if we come here? Old Ma snorted and proudly said, that's only for ordinary people. What kind of person am I, Old Ma Xiaoyun? No one can recognize me no matter what I do, not to mention that I have that person secretly watching over me. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Lu Chen laughed and said, in any case, it's those children of influential clans who are powerful, right? We can't afford to offend them. Old Ma rolled his eyes and said, bullshit. At the end of the day, you brat, there's someone standing behind you, supporting you. Until now, that person still doesn't have a disciple, but he has an exceedingly powerful peerless divine ability. If you really shed all pretense of cordiality with him, even if all the influential families in Kunwa City joined hands, none of them would dare to oppose you. Lu Chen laughed and said, unfortunately, I can't have a falling out with him, so I can only endure, right? Old Ma sternly said, that's right. Then aren't you talking nonsense? I'm not talking nonsense. Old Ma solemnly said, while you're suppressing your resentment, you can think to yourself, when I'm done with my business in the future, I'll come and settle the score with you. Let's see if you idiots, who look down on others, will kneel in front of me at that time. Lu Chen couldn't help but laugh and said, you're really thinking too far ahead. Old Ma laughed mischievously and said, of course. All these years, I've been so angry at you that my life has been shortened by 10 years. Every time, didn't I secretly think like this to get through it? Lu Chen extended a finger to him to show his respect, then he casually said, nowadays, in the Kunlun party, who has a deep background and can't be provoked? Tell me all of them. In the future, I'll stay away from them. Old Ma thought for a moment then said, right now, you have the air of a useless person on your face. At most, you're only at the Qi refining realm. The Kunlun party is so big, and there are at least 80 to 90,000 people with higher cultivation than you. It seems like you can't provoke any of them. Lu Chen, Old Ma said again, oh, but of course, there are some who are especially powerful. You especially can't provoke them. Everyone, people as powerful as spiritual master Yuanying and Jin Dan Friar can crush you with a finger. Their direct disciples are almost all elite disciples, so you should also stay away from them. As for the disciples of the aristocratic families, although there are many Kunwu aristocratic families, there will always be ups and downs. Right now, the most powerful families are probably the Bai, Tai, and Su clans. You should give in to them. As for the small aristocratic families that have declined, they actually don't matter. Lu Chen suddenly thought of something and asked, is there a aristocratic family with the surname Yi in this city? How strong is it? Yi clan. Old Ma thought for a moment then said, it's all right. These years, I haven't heard of any powerful figures emerging from this family. It can't be considered one of the most powerful families, but it can't be said to have declined either. It can be considered average. Why are you asking about it? Lu Chen said, oh, it's nothing. I've seen a girl from this family before. He then told Old Ma about how he met Xin in the land of chaos. Old Ma frowned and said, why didn't you tell her about this? Lu Chen said indifferently, what would happen if I told her? Old Ma didn't hesitate at all and said, of course, I'd think of a way to avoid this flaw and not let her get in the way. Halfway through his sentence, Old Ma's voice suddenly dropped and his expression changed slightly. He glanced at Lu Chen, shook his head, and sighed softly. He didn't say anything else. Lu Chen smiled and said, yes, don't let her get in the way. He lowered his head and looked at the wine cup in his hand. The amber wine trembled slightly in the cup. After a while, he raised the cup and drank the wine. As the days passed, Lu Chen quietly stayed in the small courtyard. It could be said that he didn't go out at all. Fatty Old Ma went out a few times. He came and went in a hurry, and no one knew what he was busy with. Even Black Dog sneaked out to stroll in the alley outside, but he quickly ran back. When he was bored, Lu Chen would sit behind the counter in the front hall when Old Ma went out. He said that he was helping Old Ma look after the shop. However, he soon realized how accurate his previous judgment was. For a whole 7 days, he didn't see a single customer come to the Black Hill Pavilion. On the morning of the 8th day, Old Ma very seriously told Lu Chen that there should be some progress in helping him infiltrate the Kunlun party, and he would go out to do it. So, Lu Chen sat quietly behind the lonely counter and looked out the door at the quiet alley. Atsu lay directly in front of the door, enjoying the passing wind from the alley. Its tail wagged from time to time, as if it was enjoying its dog life. Suddenly, there was a sudden sound of footsteps coming from the bluestone road in the alley outside. After a moment, a clear and melodious voice, like a wind chime gently swaying in the spring breeze, came from outside. Black Hill Pavilion. Ah, what a strange name. Chapter 84. The black dog suddenly pricked up its ears, then suddenly jumped up and stared at the door with its eyes shining. It bared its sharp fangs and let out a low growl from its throat, looking like it was about to bite someone. There was an exclamation from outside the house, but a moment later, a figure suddenly appeared at the door. It was Lu Chen. Lu Chen kicked the stupid dog to the ground and scolded, "Stupid dog. This is a guest. If you want to eat meat and bones in the future, you will have to rely on him. Do you want to die? Woo woo." The low and fierce growl suddenly changed, and the ferocious aura on the black dog disappeared in the blink of an eye. It wagged its tail wildly and hummed in a low voice. It ran out of the door and circled the figure outside the door twice, shaking its head and wagging its tail without any integrity to speak of. Ah. Yeah. The person outside the house was shocked at first, then let out a sound of, huh, but then burst out laughing. She covered her mouth and laughed. Why is this dog so fun? Lu Chen looked up and saw a young girl about 10 years old standing on the bluestone road outside the house. She had almond-shaped eyes and peach cheeks, and her skin was as white as snow. Although she had not grown up yet, from the looks of it, she would definitely be a stunning beauty in the future. At this moment, the little girl looked at the black dog jumping around beside her. She seemed to find it very interesting, and she was full of smiles. There was a soft breeze blowing through the alley, and her red sleeves fluttered in the wind. At this moment, the spring breeze, the deep alley, and the young girl, this scene was like a beautiful painting. Lu Chen called out to the stupid dog that was jumping around blindly. Then, his gaze fell on the girl's face, and he couldn't help but sigh in admiration in his heart. Although the girl in front of him wasn't very old, her complexion was truly the first time he'd seen someone with such a complexion. It could be said that she was born with a beauty that could cause the downfall of nations and people since she was young. "Miss, what's the matter?" Lu Chen asked the little girl politely, and at the same time, glanced into the distance of the alley. There was no one in the alley. She seemed to have come alone. The girl pointed at the signboard with the words, Black Hill Pavilion, and asked, "Is this a shop?" Lu Chen was startled for a moment, then he turned around and said, "I guess so." The girl nodded with a smile and walked in. At the same time, a pair of bright and clear eyes looked at the simple things in the shop. She was a little curious and a little cautious. Lu Chen walked back to the counter and asked, "What do you want to buy?" "Yes." The young lady responded, but she didn't speak immediately. Instead, she glanced at the row of shelves behind the counter. There were some items on the shelves inside the store. Most of them were the most common spirit materials. They looked like they had been there for a long time because many places were covered in dust. After noticing that the girl's gaze had become a little strange, Lu Chen also turned around to look. When the scene on the shelves fell into his eyes, Lu Chen was also stunned for a moment. Then he turned around and smiled a little awkwardly, saying, "The owner of this shop is very lazy, I've let you see a joke." "Hey, are you not the shopkeeper of this Black Hill Pavilion?" The girl asked with some surprise and looked around. In this shop, it was obvious that only Lu Chen was looking after the shop. "I'm not the shopkeeper here," Lu Chen said seriously. "In fact, I am the uncle of the shopkeeper. Today, he went out to buy goods, so I came to help look after the shop." "Oh, I see." The girl nodded as if she believed him. However, when she looked at the simple appearance of the shop, her face gradually revealed a difficult expression. Lu Chen asked with a smile, "What do you need? Tell me. If there is, I will show it to you. If there isn't, then there's nothing I can do. Anyways, I can't force you to buy or sell in broad daylight, right?" The girl smiled again. At that moment, the beauty of the girl hit him in the face, like the clear sky after a storm. There was a refreshing atmosphere. "I want to buy some Tsangju Zi." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Tsangju Zi, wait, let me see if there is any." Okay." The girl smiled. Lu Chen searched the shelves and finally found this relatively common spirit material in a shelf. He put it on the counter and said, "There really is. If it was anything else, I wouldn't give it to you. But this spirit material, Tsangju Zi, is taken from the seed. There is a hard shell on the outside and it will not spoil after 10 years. You should be able to use it." The girl thought about it and nodded. "Yes, that is true. My master also said so." "All right then, I'll buy 10. Okay." Lu Chen picked out 10 Tsangju Zi that looked good. He found a cloth and wiped them clean. Then, he wrapped them in paper and handed them to the girl. The girl smiled sweetly and took the paper bag. As she put it away, she reached into her pocket and said, "How much, ah?" Suddenly, she exclaimed and her expression changed. It was as if she was stunned. Lu Chen looked at her and said, "What is it?" The girl's cheeks flushed red. Her skin looked white and rosy, adding to her beauty. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She said, I seem to have forgotten to bring money." "Oh, I see." Lu Chen sighed. This business was too difficult. There was hesitation on the girl's face. After a moment, she said awkwardly to Lu Chen, "Uncle, I have an urgent need for this Tsangju Zi. Can I take it first? I will have someone send the money later." Halfway through her words, she suddenly found that Lu Chen was staring at her with a strange expression. She couldn't help but lower her voice. A moment later, she couldn't help but ask, "Can't I?" Lu Chen coughed and didn't answer. He asked instead, "What did you call me just now?" The girl stilled and said, "Uncle, you are so old, you are the uncle of the shopkeeper here." "Oh, okay." Lu Chen shook his head and then said seriously to the girl, "No, you cannot owe money for the goods." The girl was shocked. She seemed to want to say something but her face seemed to become even redder. She said in a low voice, I am not that kind of person. I said I will return it, I will definitely return it." That grace of lowering her head was enough to intoxicate people without drinking. Her watery eyes were enough to make the world fall for her. Lu Chen shook his head and said, "You can't." The girl looked sadly at him and could only put the paper bag in her hand back on the counter. Then she turned and walked out. Just as she was about to reach the door, Lu Chen's voice suddenly came from behind her. "Hey! Your money bag is gone." The girl's footsteps suddenly stopped. Looking back, she saw that Lu Chen had walked out from behind the counter. At the same time, he was holding a small red bag with a flower embroidered with gold thread. "Ah! I was wondering where the money bag went." The girl's beautiful eyes widened and she quickly walked over. She said with a giggle and then reached out to Lu Chen. Lu Chen let her grab the small bag but he didn't let go. The girl pulled and was somewhat surprised. She looked at Lu Chen and said, "Uncle, why don't you let go?" Lu Chen said, "I can return the money bag to you, but you should also return the Zhangju Zi in your sleeve to me." As he spoke, he didn't look at the girl's suddenly stiff smile. He sighed and said, "Also, don't call me uncle. It sounds weird." Chapter 85. The girl tugged at the pouch twice, but found that Lu Chen's grip was exceptionally firm, and she couldn't pull it back. After her expression changed, the gentleness and carefulness on her face suddenly disappeared, and was replaced by a kind of annoyance. With a snort, her other hand suddenly raised, and a paper bag actually flew out from her sleeve, smashing towards Lu Chen's face. Lu Chen reached out to catch it, and casually grabbed it with his hand, then nodded and let go. The girl took a step back, and first hid the small bag in her bosom, then looked up and down at Lu Chen, coldly snorted, and said, "I can't tell, you actually know such despicable methods." Lu Chen laughed, and said, "I used to rely on this to make a living." As he said that, his gaze fell on the girl's exceptionally beautiful face, and he frowned, saying, "Little girl, since you have such a beautiful appearance, why can't you do anything? Do you really have to do this? Don't blame me for not warning you, these despicable people are not good. With your beautiful face, if you aren't careful, I'm afraid you'll be eaten alive." "Oh." The girl didn't look old, only about 10 years old, but at this moment, after removing her disguise, her body suddenly had an additional mature aura. Her young face revealed a disdainful look, and she looked at Lu Chen, saying, "So, you are still a good person?" Lu Chen said, "I can't say that I'm a good person, but it's not bad to remind you, what do you think?" "Che." The girl sneered, and said, "You're just saying it casually. Less nonsense, do you have anything else? If not, I'm leaving." This swindler was actually so self-righteous, as if not stealing from Lu Chen, but Lu Chen's fault. Lu Chen also couldn't help but laugh, but first, this girl was really too young, and second, her face was already very beautiful at such a young age, it really made people unable to harden their hearts to do anything. He immediately waved his hand, and said, "You can leave, anyway, next time you're caught, I won't be so polite. This broken shop, I'm not just passing by, even if you pay me money, I won't come again." The girl angrily shouted, then turned around and walked out of the door. The black dog next to her wagged its tail and came over, jumping enthusiastically beside the girl. The girl looked at the black dog, and especially saw the lame Atsu's hind legs. She was first startled, but then her eyes became slightly soft, and she reached out her hand to touch the head of the Atsu, and said, "This dog is much cuter than your master." The Atsu tilted its head, and stuck out its tongue, and looked affectionate. Suddenly, Lu Chen from behind, and said, "Atsu. That's a bad guy, he wants to steal our things." The Atsu didn't seem to react for a moment, and blankly looked back at Lu Chen. Lu Chen sternly said, "Be fierce to her. Bite her." Atu jumped up, as if he had suddenly come to his senses. Immediately, The hair on his neck stood up, and he let out a low growl, baring his fangs at the young girl. He looked like a hungry wolf, ready to pounce and bite someone in the next moment. Ah! The girl was shocked, and suddenly jumped away as if she was electrocuted. She quickly ran out of the door, and then cursed at the shop, a house full of monsters, bad people, and stupid dogs. Woof 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 woof, as the Atsu roared, it suddenly rushed out. The girl screamed and ran away. Her speed was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, she ran out of the alley. The Atsu chased a step, but was stopped by Lu Chen from behind, and then turned back bitterly. But then it seemed to be happy again, and quite proud. It circled around Lu Chen a few times, and kept barking, as if it wanted to take credit. Lu Chen sighed, looked at it, squatted down, and grabbed the head of the Atsu in front of his eyes, pulled its ears, and scratched the dog's fur. After looking left and right, he frowned and said, "Strange, I remember that snow wolves and black jackals are intelligent and cunning monsters. Why do you always look stupid? Woof woof, woof woof." The Atsu stuck out half of its tongue and licked Lu Chen, and looked very happy. In the evening, old Ma came back. As soon as he entered the house, he pulled Lu Chen to close the door and went to the backyard. Then he said with a smile, "It's finally done." Lu Chen nodded and said, "That's good. When do we go up the mountain?" Old Ma said, "In 3 days. A few days ago, the Kunlun party just held the annual immortal appraisal meeting, and they accepted a new batch of disciples. Recently, it's the time for those who have no chance to officially join the sect to display their supernatural powers. You're not conspicuous at all among them." Lu Chen looked at him, and said with a smile, "What do you mean by displaying their supernatural powers?" Old Ma laughed, and said in a low voice, "On the surface, the Kunlun party wants to accept so many disciples, but in fact, there are a lot of people who want to squeeze their own children into the sect. Don't tell me you don't know about this." Lu Chen shrugged and said, "From what you said, there are quite a lot of disciples like me who sneak into the sect in a roundabout way." Old Ma said with a smile, "Of course. The immortal appraisal meeting has accepted 500 people, and they can at least squeeze another 200 or 300 in." "Damn!" Lu Chen was shocked, and said, "There are so many." Old Ma snorted, and said, "The more they accept, the more spirit stones they can collect. This business is better than anything else." Lu Chen said with emotion, "You're right." At night, 2 people and a dog sat in the small courtyard again. Old Ma took a sip of wine, and said to Lu Chen with a frown, "You let that little girl go just like that?" Lu Chen said helplessly, "What else can I do? I can't really detain her, can I?" Old Ma thought for a while, and said, "At least you should ask about her identity, background, and name, right?" Lu Chen shook his head, and said, "It's useless to ask. It's all fake." Old Ma clicked his tongue, and his eyes suddenly became a little strange. He looked at Lu Chen, and said, "Speaking of which, why didn't I notice that you have this trick before? I didn't see you learn it from that person." Lu Chen smiled, picked up a cup of wine, and lightly said, "That was before I met him. I was muddling around in this city, trying to survive. Aside from picking up trash, I also learned how to steal and swindle people." Old Ma was stunned, and looked at Lu Chen for a long time without saying anything. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "It's not easy to be a lowly person. You were so young back then. Did you suffer a lot?" "Yes." Listening to Lu Chen's extremely simple answer, Old Ma didn't know what to say for a moment. After a while, he laughed dryly and changed the topic, and said, "Ha, that little girl is really unlucky. She happened to pass by here and wanted to do some business, but she actually met an expert. She must have been half dead with anger, no?" Lu Chen suddenly interrupted Old Ma. Old Ma was startled, and said, "What's wrong?" Lu Chen smiled, and then he gazed at the cold and dark night sky in the distance. After that, he took a sip of wine and said, "All those years ago, when I did all these things that harmed people, I'd always checked and calculated carefully, and there was no such thing as a coincidence. As for whether she happened to pass by, I don't know. Chapter 86. What should we do? Old Ma furrowed his brows in distress and said, it feels a little troublesome. Lu Chen glanced at him and said, maybe they aren't here for me. Old Ma was stunned and said, then who are they here for? You. Lu Chen looked at Old Ma's fat face and said seriously, to be able to open a shop in such a desolate alley, he must be a fat sheep that is easily deceived. I think that's what that little girl is thinking. Get lost. Old Ma scolded angrily and then took out a book as thick as a finger and threw it at him. Lu Chen caught it and flipped it open to take a look. At the same time, he asked, what is this? Some of the most famous people in the Kunlun sect, the young geniuses of the younger generation, the children of the aristocratic families with deep backgrounds, and some people with eccentric temperament and behavior. Brief information about them, including Dao techniques, magical treasures, and so on, are all written on it. In addition, there are also some situations in the Kunlun party's main halls. You can take a look when you have time. After you have written it down, burn this book. Lu Chen was silent for a long time. The joking expression on his face disappeared and he sat up straight. Then, with a serious expression, he said to Old Ma, thank you for your hard work. Old Ma grinned and said, this kind of thing should be shown to people who understand. Only then will it be satisfying. Lu Chen sighed and said to him, with this kind of ability, you can actually do a lot of big things. It's a bit of a disadvantage to hang around with people like me. Old Ma said, in this world, is there anything bigger than what you want to do? Lu Chen sneered and put away the book. Then, he picked up the wine pot and poured wine for Old Ma and himself. At the same time, he asked, about the person we are looking for, what do you know? Old Ma shook his head and said, I have no clue. We do not know anything about that person, whether he is a man or a woman, whether he is old or young, whether his cultivation level is high or low. Other than knowing that he is hiding in the Kunlun party to do something big, we do not know anything else. Lu Chen raised his cup and clinked it with Old Ma's, then drained it in one gulp and said, take your time to find it. 3 days later, Lu Chen went to the Kunlun mountain and joined the Kunlun party, becoming a Kunlun disciple that was envied by most mortals. This was a layer of dazzling halo, like a gilded and dazzling coat, draped over his body. To outsiders, it looked so glorious, except for the insiders who were also on Kunlun mountain. Just as Old Ma had said before, although the Kunlun sect, which had a history of 5,000 years, usually paid the most attention to rules and integrity, after so many years, the persistence passed down by the founding master was still flexible. Apart from the 500 new disciples who were officially accepted during the Grand Immortal Appraisal meeting, Kunlun sect had secretly added another 250 people into the sect. Lu Chen was one of them. Unfortunately, his innate aptitude was considered to be the worst among all of them. In the cultivation world, talent were based on the 5 elements will in the dantian of the Sea of Qi. The more divine pillars, the higher the talent. Generally speaking, only disciples who had at least 2 5 elements divine pillars would be accepted by famous sects like the Kunlun party. The hope of a first pillar disciple was too small, and the loss outweighed the gain by placing spiritual materials and resources on such a person. Yes, Lu Chen was the kind of person that the loss outweighed the gain, but this kind of person was not rare in the Kunlun mountain, because who did not have the dream of becoming an immortal? No matter how bad one's talent was, there was always a little hope. Besides, even if there was no hope of becoming an immortal, if one could get some opportunities in the Kunlun mountain and practice some magic, not only would one's strength increase greatly, one's life would also be extended a lot. Why not? This kind of thinking was naturally human nature. As for the high and mighty elders of the Kunlun sect, it was impossible for them to care about these small matters. Who didn't have a close relationship with someone? Furthermore, it wasn't like they were sent in for free. Therefore, in such a bright and slightly gray background, Lu Chen safely and calmly entered the Kunlun party, without attracting anyone's attention, and became a servant disciple with the lowest position in the Kunlun party. However, since he was of the lowest position, the Kunlun party would not keep idle people, so Lu Chen was quickly arranged to go to the Bai Chao Tang of the Kunlun party, and like the many other servant disciples, he grew all kinds of spiritual herbs for the Kunlun party. The majestic Kunlun was the first famous mountain in the western land. From a distance, one could only see the majestic peaks rising and falling, and the clouds were like waves. In the deepest part of the huge mountain range, the clouds gathered like a vast ocean, and as far as the eye could see, one could vaguely see the four faintly discernible figures of strange peaks floating high above the clouds. It could be said to be a magical place that seized all the creation of heaven and earth. However, this kind of immortal spiritual land, historically, only the most elite part of the Kunlun party could set foot in it. Ordinary servant disciples did not even have the qualification to go near it. In the blink of an eye, Lu Chen had already entered the Kunlun party for a month. Over the past month, he was no different from the people around him. Everyone woke up early and slept late every day, working hard for the spiritual herbs in the Kunlun immortal family's spiritual fields, hoping that one day they could get a lucky chance and stand out from the crowd. There were many servant disciples in the Kunlun party. It was said that among the 100,000 disciples, perhaps 60 to 70,000 were such people. To some extent, it was the hard work of the countless common people at the foot of the mountain and the many servant disciples on the mountain that supported a small part of the elites of the Kunlun party. As for the Bai Chao Tang, after Lu Chen came here, he was given a spiritual field of 1 mu, so that he could plant spiritual herbs. Every time it was harvest time, he had to hand in a fixed amount of harvest, and then he would be considered to have completed his task. If he did not hand in enough, he would be punished, and if he had an extra harvest, he would be rewarded. Most of the servant disciples relied on these extra harvests that they had worked hard to obtain in exchange for a little hope of standing out in the future. Hope was the most beautiful thing, was it not? For most people, it was, but for Lu Chen, it was not. He quietly lived in the Kunlun party, and then quietly observed the giant Kunlun party in the shadows of the crowd. After slowly familiarizing himself with the situation here, he also began to touch the things he wanted little by little. Of course, that mysterious devil cult spy was still nowhere to be found. But in this month, Lu Chen had already learned some things. For example, the two supremes of the Kunlun party, Hakushin Jinkun was in closed-door training on the mountain peak among the clouds all year round, while Supremes Tianlan went to the immortal city of Zhengxianmeng, and seemed to be very busy. This year, the Kunlun party had accepted more than 700 new disciples. Fortunately, there were many talented newcomers, but those were phoenixes that flew up the branches, and had almost no interaction with sparrows like Lu Chen. And Heng Chuan, whom he had met before, had indeed left the Kunlun mountain a few days ago. It was said that he had gone to the distant northern region to hone his state of mind and cultivation. When Lu Chen heard the news, he sighed for that friend in his heart. But very soon, he thought that he would be very quiet and would be dormant for a very long time in the Kunlun mountain, but suddenly there were waves. It was one afternoon a month after he went up the mountain. At the edge of the forest where his spiritual field was located, he once again saw a familiar person coming out of the forest. It was Xian. That day, Xian's face seemed a little pale. Although her face was still so beautiful, she seemed to be a little absent-minded and did not notice that among the many servant disciples working in the spiritual field not far away, there was Lu Chen. Lu Chen quietly turned around, thinking that Kunlun mountain was so big, if he missed it today, he might as well not see it again in the future. Trouble. Then, he suddenly heard a scream coming from behind. The voice was sharp, and for some reason, it suddenly reminded him of the journey in the land of chaos. Lu Chen shook his head and sighed, thinking that it was troublesome. Chapter 87. Lu Chen's initial reaction was to turn around and leave. He was prepared to quietly avoid her. After all, Kunlun mountain was so big and Xian did not seem to have seen him. If he missed this chance, he might not see her again in the future. But the scream that followed was indeed a little frightening. It was as if Xian had suddenly seen the most terrifying thing in the world. Her scream was heart-wrenching. Lu Chen stopped in his tracks, feeling a little helpless. At that moment, his mind replayed the journey with Exin in the land of chaos from beginning to end. He muttered, "It can't be. I don't remember doing anything to you. Are you so afraid to see me?" But when he turned his head to look in the direction of Exin, he suddenly frowned. He saw that when Exin walked out of the forest, a figure suddenly ran out from behind her and grabbed her hand. When the figure that appeared from behind appeared in everyone's line of sight, it immediately caused a commotion among the crowd of odd-job disciples who had slowly gathered to watch the show. Even the usually calm Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. At the same time, he instantly understood why Exin would let out such a tragic scream. It was a man wearing the Kunlun Party disciple uniform. But his face was completely destroyed. At least a dozen shocking scars remained on his face. His facial features were terrible. One of his ears was missing, his nose was gone, and there was a big cut on his chin. A terrible scar had slashed across his left eye, leaving a pitted red flesh. It seemed that this eyeball had also been destroyed. This face looked like it had been slashed countless times by a sharp blade, or had been ruthlessly gnawed on by a terrifying beast. It was completely devoid of human form. It was hard to imagine that a person who had suffered such serious injuries could actually survive that disaster. At this moment, it was a bright and sunny day. Under the bright sky, the surrounding people all felt a trace of coldness, and a few timid female disciples even closed their eyes and looked away, not daring to look directly at that person. The terrifying face that resembled a demon from hell suddenly appeared behind Exin. After grabbing her, the face leaned in and let out a deep, furious growl. When she lifted her eyes, the face was already inches away from her. No wonder she let out such a shrill scream. "Let me go. Let me go." However, to Lu Chen's surprise, Exin did not faint from fright. Instead, she screamed in horror and struggled with all her might, trying to break free from the monstrous man's grasp. At the same time, she cried out repeatedly, "Shut up!" The man with the terrifying face let out a low roar, but that did not calm Exin down. Instead, she struggled even more intensely. This scene was seen by the surrounding people, and there was a sudden uproar. A beautiful girl was being bullied by such a monster. No one could stand it. Suddenly, 7 or 8 people from the side came over and shouted to stop it. Lu Chen also took 2 steps forward. No matter what, he had some friendship with Exin. At the same time, he also had some doubts in his heart. After joining the Kunlun party for a month, he had gradually learned a little about this famous sect. Although it was not as perfect as the legend said, the Kunlun party was still a place that followed rules. In general, it was impossible for there to be any public bullying on the Kunlun mountain. However, the scene in front of him was obviously not right. Just when Lu Chen was hesitating whether he should go forward to help, he suddenly heard Exin's voice crying, "Let go, Senior He. I beg you, don't do this." Lu Chen's body trembled. He immediately focused his attention and looked towards that man. As expected, when he looked carefully, he could vaguely make out a little of that handsome Kunlun disciple's appearance that he had met in Crescent City that day from that little bit of residual outline. He gang. Didn't he already die on the Black Armor Mountain in the Land of Chaos? On that day, the scene of a large group of terrible black jackals swarming on the Black Armor Mountain was still fresh in Lu Chen's memory. Then, when he looked at He Gang's face again, those clear and terrifying scars that seemed to have been left behind by sharp claws and terrifying beast teeth, Lu Chen couldn't help but feel a slight chill in his heart. Exin was crying and shouting in panic. The odd-job disciples next to her obviously did not know He Gang, so they surrounded him with righteous indignation. But He Gang also seemed to be very emotional and strange. Under the crowd's gaze, he did not have the slightest intention of retreating, and even glared at the people around him with terrible anger. Seeing that the scene suddenly became tense and on the verge of breaking out, suddenly, a loud shout came from behind the crowd. "Stop, what do you want?" This shout was full of momentum, and the tone was loud, instantly suppressing all the other voices. After a moment, a tall man walked quickly to the center. He first glanced at He Gang and Exian, and his face slightly darkened, but he did not lose his temper. Then he turned to look at the crowd around him, frowned, and said in a deep voice, "Back off. What are you doing here? Do you want to rebel?" Lu Qin stood in the crowd and glanced at this person. Seeing that he had thick eyebrows and a square face, he was a disciple of the Kunlun party's Bai Chao Tang, who was sent to manage the spiritual field. His name was Zhou Kuei. After all, almost all the odd job disciples were newcomers who knew nothing about cultivation, and planting spiritual fields still needed some tricks, so Bai Chao Tang would often send some disciples down. About every 100 odd job disciples would have an official disciple in charge, and at the same time, they would teach the tricks of planting and some of the most basic cultivation methods. Zhou Kuei was such a person. Those who could get such a job were basically in the foundation realm, so in the Kunlun party, he could also be regarded as an elite disciple who had reached a higher level. Usually, the odd job disciples naturally respected Zhou Kuei very much. Although they only called him senior brother, in reality, his position was like a teacher and a father, and they did not dare to disobey him easily. But today's scene was really infuriating, and a bold person in the crowd shouted loudly, "Senior brother Zhou, it's not that we want to cause trouble, but that person is bullying our junior sister in broad daylight." Zhou Kuei's face was as dark as water. He slowly turned around and glanced at He Gang's hand that was still tightly gripping Exian's wrist. He snorted and said, "Junior brother He, you're not doing this right." Facing this Bai Chao Tang disciple Zhou Kuei, whose cultivation was in the foundation realm, He Gang's imposing manner was obviously weaker, but he still raised his head and shouted through gritted teeth, "I didn't do anything, I just wanted to chat with junior sister E. What did I do wrong?" Zhou Kuei's gaze fell on Exian's pretty but tear-stained face, a trace of sympathy seemed to flash across his eyes, but he still sighed and said, "Junior sister E, is it like this?" Exian struggled with all her might, perhaps because Zhou Kuei was right beside her. He Gang finally did not dare to use force anymore, letting her withdraw her arm, but there was already an obvious red mark on her wrist. Then, Exian glanced at Zhou Kuei, a complicated expression flashed across her face, like fear, regret, and also like she was at a loss. In the end, she slowly lowered her head and softly replied, "Yes." The odd job disciples in the crowd immediately burst into an uproar. Everyone had a look of surprise on their faces, and Lu Chen in the crowd frowned, looking deeply at Exian. Chapter 88. The wide spiritual field that everyone was currently in was actually a flat and wide valley in the Kunlun mountain range. It was surrounded by mountains, and in the middle was a rare expanse of flat land that was rich in spiritual energy and fertile. It was a very important production area for the Kunlun party's Bai Chao Tang. Due to the fact that the largest mountain next to it was the Rock Mountain, this valley basin was named the Rock Mountain Valley. At this moment, the warm sunlight shone down from the sky, shining on Rock Valley. The mountain wind blew through the valley from the forest, and countless spiritual plants danced in the wind, like a magnificent wave. At the edge of the forest at the foot of Rock Mountain, the atmosphere was cold and strange. Many servant disciples gathered there, looking at the young girl with her head lowered in disbelief. Exian's panicked crying didn't seem like she was just chatting in the forest. She was obviously frightened. But in the end, the victim herself said that she was fine, so what else could they do? Zhou Kuei reacted quickly. He turned around and shouted at the servant disciples, "Okay. Didn't you see that junior sister E said that she was fine? What are you still doing here? Go back to work." Many janitor disciples looked at each other in dismay. Most of the new disciples were young and full of vigor. However, everyone knew that there might be some inside story behind this situation. So, under the whispers and strange gazes, the crowd slowly dispersed. After Zhou Kuei dispersed the crowd, he frowned at He Gang and Exian at the edge of the forest. He wanted to turn around and leave with a straight face. Who knew that at this time, Exian suddenly ran a few steps towards him and said, "Senior brother Zhou, I'll go with you." Zhou Kuei's body trembled slightly. Before he could say anything, He Gang, who was behind him, already said loudly, "Junior sister E, I still have something to say to you." Xian didn't even look at him. She looked at Zhou Kuei with pleading eyes. Zhou Kuei was silent for a moment, then nodded his head and said to Xian, "Okay." Xian immediately looked happy and nodded. He Gang was shocked. "Senior brother Zhou, what are you doing?" Zhou Kuei's eyes flashed with a trace of impatience. He turned to look at He Gang and frowned. "Junior brother He, everything should be done in moderation. Besides, junior sister E has something to do with me. Are you trying to discipline me?" He Gang subconsciously flinched under Zhou Kuei's piercing stare. After a moment, he seemed to grit his teeth and glanced fiercely at Xian, then turned around and left without a word. As Xian watched He Gang leave, she finally heaved a sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Zhou Kuei saw her expression and his eyes softened. He asked softly, "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Xian nodded silently. Zhou Kuei said, "Let's go." He walked forward. Xian silently followed beside him, but after walking for a while, she suddenly heard Zhou Kuei's voice, "Junior sister E, you still have to think of a solution for this matter yourself." Xian raised her head to look at Zhou Kuei in a daze, only to see that Zhou Kuei was not looking at her. Instead, he was looking straight ahead, but he said in a voice that only she could hear, "I have known Senior He for many years, and I know that his talent are extraordinary. Now that he is about to break through to the Golden Elixir realm, at his age, his future can be said to be limitless." He turned around with a sympathetic expression mixed with some helplessness. "It doesn't matter if I help you once in a while. Senior brother He will probably just smile when he hears it. But if I help him again and again, I'm afraid he won't like it. Do you understand?" Xian's face turned pale. After a while, she lowered her head and said in a low voice, "I understand." At this moment, she seemed to be in a daze. Her face was as pale as paper. She seemed to be trapped in some kind of fear for the future, so much so that she didn't notice that in a spiritual field not far from them, Lu Qin was standing there thoughtfully looking at her figure. The Kunlun party was a famous sect with many rules. But after so many years, it wasn't that it didn't care about human feelings. Living in the mountains was hard and cultivating was boring, so the sect didn't strictly forbid its disciples from leaving the mountain. Generally speaking, even if it was a part-time disciple, as long as he could guarantee to come back before the curfew, the Kunlun party's mountain gate guards wouldn't stop him. However, it was precisely because of the curfew that anyone who violated it would be severely punished. Therefore, unless they received orders from the sect to go out, most people could only stroll in Kunwa City at the foot of the mountain. However, the Kunlun mountain range was very vast. Generally, the disciples who were assigned to cultivate or work on the mountains far away from the mountain gate of the southern foothills would need several hours to reach the mountain gate if they didn't have the ability to fly fast. In fact, they wouldn't be able to go down the mountain. The Shirpan Valley where Lu Qin lived was about 2 hours away from the mountain gate of the southern foothills. It wasn't far, but it wasn't close either. As long as he could squeeze out some time, he could go to Kunwa City for a stroll. In Kunwa City, the fatty old Ma's Black Hill Pavilion was naturally the place he often went to. The remote and quiet alley was as deep and serene as before. It seemed that no matter how many years passed, there wouldn't be a single customer. Old Ma sat on the threshold with a somewhat sad expression. He sighed and said, "Alas, when will there be any business? Don't think about it." Sitting behind the counter in the room, Lu Qin yawned lazily and said, "Just give up. You're not cut out to do business." Old Ma spat and said indignantly, "Bullshit. Your father, was born to be a genius. In the future, I'll definitely do something big and earn a fortune that can rival a country. At that time, you can just wait to kneel in front of me." Lu Qin said, "Wake up. It's not dark yet. Stop dreaming." Old Ma muttered. He probably felt that it was really inappropriate to talk about ideals with this person, so he said, "You've been on the mountain for a month now. How's the situation?" Lu Qin shrugged and said, "In the beginning, I couldn't say anything. However, this Kunlun party really has a lot of rules. It's a 5,000-year famous sect. It's not strange. Old Ma said with a smile. Then he glanced at the empty alley outside and said, by the way, I found the person you asked me to investigate last time. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and looked over. He said, You actually found him. I've underestimated you. Old Horse had a smug look on his face as he said, Nonsense. Who do you think I am? As long as I want to investigate, there's nothing on this Kunlun mountain that I can't figure out. Lu Chen was too lazy to care about this guy's bragging. He just asked, who is that person? Old Ma said, Moonlight Cut is extremely difficult to practice. There are not many young disciples who can practice it. Moreover, it's a woman. Moreover, during that period of time, she was not on the mountain of Kunlun. After searching for a long time, there's probably only one person left. Su Qingjun, the only disciple of the Kunlun party's Masato Kihara. Chapter 89. Muyuan. Lu Chen frowned slightly. After pondering for a moment, he asked with a strange look in his eyes, the one from the Tieji branch? Old Ma nodded and said, that's right. That old man is one of the 4 Yuanying Jinren of the Tieji branch of the Kunlun party. He's also recognized as the strongest in Taoism and divine powers. It's not an exaggeration to say that he's the leader of the Tieji branch. Lu Chen nodded and said, what about Su Qingjun herself? Old Ma said, she's very outstanding. She's extremely talented. It's said that she's one of the top 4 pillars. She can be said to be very gifted. Her progress in Taoism is very fast and she's worthy of the word, genius. She's only 22 years old, but she's already at the peak of the foundational state. Among the young foundational state disciples of the Kunlun party, there are about a dozen of them who've reached the peak of the Jin Dan state and are only one step away. But the most famous ones are Su Qingjun, He Yi, Song Huaisong, and Feng Yu. At this point, Old Ma paused and looked at Lu Chen. At such a young age, you are only one step away from the Golden Core realm. With this kind of strength and talent, the difference between you and an ordinary Foundation realm disciple is like heaven and earth. I don't need to say more, right? Lu Chen smiled and said, if she's lucky enough, she might have a chance to peek into the Yuanying state in the future. Yes, becoming a Jinren. Old Ma sighed with some emotion. He then said to Lu Chen seriously, since you know it, don't think too much, okay? That girl has no grudge against you. She didn't really hurt you in the land of chaos. You don't have to go against such a proud girl, do you? Lu Chen's expression didn't change. It seemed that he didn't take this matter to heart. He said casually, I don't plan to do anything to her. I'm just curious. Old Ma stared at him for a moment, then snorted and said, that's not necessarily the case. You're full of evil tricks, sinister and cunning. Who knows what you'll do later? Let me tell you, although Kunlun's iron branch is weak, there are still 4 Yuanying Jinren sitting there. A genius disciple like Su Qingjun would have a limitless future. Tai Ji would definitely protect her like a precious treasure. Don't look for trouble. Pay. Lu Chen spat and said, I came to Kunlun Mountain for the sake of the common people of the world, the righteous path of life, yet I had no choice but to risk my own safety to do such a dangerous thing. Why do you, this servant, always regard me as someone who is worse than the devil cult? Old Ma said seriously, you're right, that's the truth. As he said this, he suddenly lowered his head to avoid a stool that flew towards him. Then he looked around and smiled, oh yes, where's Atsu? Why don't I see it? I just brought a bag of meat bones for it. It's chewing on it in the backyard. Lu Chen said. This black dog's appetite seems to be very big. It's eating me poor. Hurry up and bring it up the mountain. Wait for another 2 months. I'm not familiar with it yet. Lu Chen said casually, oh yes, there's one more thing. Help me check it out. It's about the girl from the E family I told you about last time. As he said this, Lu Chen told old Ma about the scene he saw at the spiritual field in Shirpan Valley. In the end, he frowned and said, He gang didn't die. And looking at Xian, she seems to be afraid of him. I'm afraid there's something strange about it. Okay, leave it to me, old Ma said with a smile. Lu Chen stood up, looked at the sky, and said, All right, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm going back to the mountain. Old Ma nodded and watched as Lu Chen walked to the door. Just as he was about to step over the threshold, old Ma suddenly said, There's something you might not know. This year, the Kunlun Party's Immortal Appraisal Conference had a great harvest. The Kunlun Party had recruited many talented 3 pillars and even 4 pillars. However, there's one thing that the Kunlun Party suppressed. Lu Chen's body trembled slightly. He turned to look at old Ma. Old Ma looked straight into his eyes. For some reason, there was a complicated and incomprehensible light in his eyes. He said softly, I heard that during the conference, they found a rare, 1-in-a-million peerless genius. That person had all 5 elements, and there were 5 pillars on the Sea of Qi. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. It seemed that even a calm person like him was startled after hearing about this matter. But very quickly, a trace of a smile appeared on his face. A self-deprecating smile appeared on his face. Amazing, a 5 pillars genius. He murmured, then raised his head to look at the sky. He said lightly, just like me, isn't it? Old Ma was silent. It was already evening when he returned to the mountain. When Lu Chen walked through the mountain gate and walked along the mountain path to his residence at the foot of Shirpan Mountain, the sky gradually darkened. Night came. At night, Kunlun Mountain was still majestic, but it was less majestic than during the day, and more distant and deep in the night. Each mountain peak was like a silent giant, quietly standing in the darkness, quietly watching Lu Chen walk between the mountains. Unknowingly, there was no one else on the mountain path. Only Lu Chen walked alone. The night was somewhat desolate, and the mountain wind was somewhat cold. It whistled past, and the faint starlight shone on the ground. One could see the swaying shadows, like dancing demons and ghosts. There was still some time before the curfew. Lu Chen looked at the night sky and expressionlessly walked on this dark road. Gradually, even he himself seemed to blend into it, becoming a part of those terrifying shadows. When it was too quiet, one's thoughts would spread out, making one's thoughts seem to be more than usual. As Lu Chen walked, he suddenly thought of the small village that he had lived in for 10 years, and the beautiful girl who was already sleeping by the Dragon Lake on Tea Mountain. At this time, would there be a cold wind blowing by the Dragon Lake? Maybe she would also feel a little cold, because she was afraid of the cold before. Lu Chen suddenly shook his head, freeing himself from these thoughts, and then continued walking. The night was still cold, and then he thought of the day before they parted, the strange look in old Ma's eyes when he looked at him. Lu Chen knew what old Ma meant. Although that fatty was not a good person, but for so many years, he was the person that he trusted the most. He knew that old Ma meant well. Old Ma actually felt that it was not worth it for him, and somewhat regretted it. However, some words could not be said to anyone, whether it was him or old Ma, or perhaps everyone actually understood in their hearts, if it was not good enough, how could it be used as a successful bait? If it was not an exceptional talent, how would the evil sect elder, that kind of person, be interested in it? Sacrifice? Perhaps only that big fatty, who was always hidden in the depths of the light, was the truly ruthless and ruthless person. The mountain breeze was faint, blowing past his clothes, as if there was a bone-chilling cold. Lu Chen gently pulled his clothes, thinking that if there was a chance in the future, he should go back to the Dragon Lake on Tea Mountain to take a look, add more soil for Dingdong's grave, and plant more trees beside it. While he was thinking of this, Lu Chen's body suddenly stopped, his footsteps abruptly stopped. In the depths of the winding mountain path hidden in the dark shadows, in the deep darkness, a soft, trembling whimper suddenly came from an unknown place. In this desolate and cold night, it sounded like the weeping of a night ghost, faintly coming over. The shadows of the surrounding tall mountains, at this moment, seemed to suddenly cover down, making this section of the mountain path seem especially dark. The night was deep, it was a desolate time. Chapter 90. The voice was intermittent and trembling, and it seemed especially ghastly and terrifying amidst the dark night and cold mountain wind, causing one to be unable to help but feel a chill run down one's spine. Although Kunlun Mountain was a spiritual mountain paradise, and it was unlikely that there would be any ghosts or spirits coming out to harm people, at this moment, it still sounded a little mournful and frightening. What if there really was a hidden demon or ghost on this mountain? Lu Qin stood where he was, his brows slightly furrowed. He listened attentively for a moment, then said to himself, "It seems to be a female ghost." After saying that, he continued to walk forward, his pace slightly slower than before. At the same time, his eyes kept looking around the mountain path ahead, as if he was looking for something. The mountain path in the night was empty. Dark shadows swayed, as if there were strange gazes hidden in the trees and bushes on both sides of the road, staring at Lu Chen's figure in the darkness. The mountain path was an old road that the Kunlun party had repaired for many years. It was mottled with wind and frost, but it was still firm and smooth, winding and stretching forward silently. The strange sound that seemed like a woman's sobbing was still drifting from ahead, but as Lu Chen walked forward, it gradually became clearer. As he walked, Lu Chen suddenly stopped. He saw a small mountain not far ahead. The mountain path passed through the mountainside, and at the same time, it branched off into a stone path. Lu Chen climbed up the small mountain. The small mountain was full of pine trees, and it was dark in the night. Even the stars in the sky were blocked, and the sweet and mournful sobbing seemed to turn here, as if it came from the mountain. The cold wind blew, and the pine trees rustled. The darkness silently stared at Lu Chen on the mountain path. Lu Chen glanced at the small mountain, then continued to walk up. The sobbing gradually became clearer, and the surrounding darkness became thicker. Not long after, Lu Chen, who was walking on the stone steps, saw a pavilion halfway up the mountain. There was a plaque outside the pavilion, but it was too dark to see the words on it. However, the most frightening thing was that there was a figure sitting at a stone table in the middle of the pavilion. Her back was facing Lu Chen, and her long hair was draped over her shoulders. Her shoulders were shaking slightly, and she was sobbing softly. One above and one below, one in front and one behind. The surroundings were thick with ghost chi. When a gust of mountain wind blew past, it lifted the strand of black hair, revealing the pale skin of the female ghost. It was as if even the air had frozen. "Hey!" Suddenly, a voice came from outside the pavilion with a trace of impatience, instantly breaking the gloomy atmosphere. Then, a figure stepped in and very impolitely complained to the female ghost, "Why are you howling here in the middle of the night? Is there something wrong with your brain?" "Ah!" The sobbing suddenly went silent. After a moment, the female ghost suddenly seemed to be shocked by herself. She suddenly let out a scream and jumped up from the stone table. She staggered back and looked at the black figure standing at the edge of the pavilion. Her trembling voice stuttered, You don't, come here. Ghost. Even ghosts are afraid of ghosts." Lu Chen snorted unhappily and casually lit the fire lighter he carried on his body. The moment the fire lit up, it illuminated the faces of the two people in the pavilion. The frightened face of the woman on the opposite side flashed there. After a moment, the expression on her face first stiffened, then revealed a somewhat incredulous expression. She said in shock, "Brother Lu, why is it you?" At this time, the only person in the Kunlun party who would call Lu Chen Brother Lu was naturally only Exian. With the dim light of the fire, Lu Chen saw Exian's surprised, happy and dazed face. There were still traces of tears and her face was very haggard. He could not help but shake his head. With a wave of his hand, the fire suddenly flashed and extinguished. Darkness once again shrouded the mountain pavilion. Not sleeping in the middle of the night, but coming here to scare people. You, this young lady, are getting more and more powerful. Lu Chen walked to the stone table in the pavilion and sat down. Exin stood at the side of the pavilion for a moment before carefully walking over. In the pavilion in the night, the faces of the two people became blurred in the darkness again, even if there was only a stone table between them. Perhaps it was surprise, or perhaps it was excitement. Exin did not care about the slightly sarcastic joke in Lu Chen's mouth. Instead, she seemed to be a little embarrassed and shrunk her neck. After a moment, she said, "Brother Lu, why are you on this Kunlun mountain?" Lu Chen looked up at the sky and felt that there was almost an hour until midnight. There was still time, so he said, "Me? I am now a disciple of the Kunlun party." Ah. Exin widened her eyes and said in shock, "What? You actually also became a disciple of the Kunlun party? Hey, don't think that I can't see the look of contempt on your face when it is dark." Exin was shocked and hurriedly waved her hand. No. Brother Lu, how could I look down on you? I really didn't expect it. But it's really great that you can come to the Kunlun mountain. No matter what, Kunlun is also a famous and upright sect. You must be much better here than at the Crescent City in the Land of Chaos. Lu Chen glanced at her and could feel the sincere joy in this inexperienced girl's words. He felt his heart warm for no reason. Then, he shook his head and snorted. "All right, tell me. Why did you come here in the middle of the night to cry and pretend to be a ghost?" I didn't pretend to be a ghost." Exin only felt her cheeks heat up. Fortunately, in this dim light, perhaps Lu Chen could not see it. She subconsciously retorted, "You, on the other hand, suddenly jumped out just now. That was really scary. Don't say that I didn't pretend to be a ghost. Even if I was a ghost, even a ghost would be scared to death by you just now. Hey, I haven't seen you for a while. You've become so good at talking." Lu Chen laughed. Exin did not want to be entangled with him on this topic anymore. She hurriedly changed the topic. "Brother Lu, what is your status now? Where are you arranged to be?" Lu Chen said, "My talent is ordinary. After I entered the sect, I could only be a servant disciple. Now, I'm planting spiritual fields in the rock valley under Baichao Tang." Ah. Exin let out a soft cry. She seemed to be in disbelief. What a coincidence. I'm also in Baichao Tang. It's really too, Her voice suddenly paused. Looking at Lu Chen, the smile on her face slowly disappeared. After a while, with some caution, she whispered to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, today, during the day, I stood in the spiritual fields and watched you come out of the forest. Then, I saw you entangle with He gang until you left." Lu Chen said lightly. Exin was speechless. After a while, she heard Lu Chen sigh. "All right, now can you tell me what exactly happened?" Chapter 91. The night was dim and the mountain breeze was gentle. Although it was a bit chilly, for some reason, it was no longer as gloomy as before. Instead, there was some warmth. Perhaps people were like this. As long as someone was with them, they would feel better. Loneliness was the deepest fear in the bottom of their hearts. Therefore, after a moment of silence, Exin finally told Lu Chen what had happened during this period of time. After returning to Kunwa City from the Land of Chaos, the Yi family, who were anxious because she had secretly left home, was naturally overjoyed. Although they scolded her a few times, they were glad that nothing serious had happened. However, there were 3 people who had left, but only one person was left when they returned. Moreover, the other 2 were genuine Kunlun disciples. Of course, this matter couldn't be easily brushed aside. Soon, someone from the Kunlun party came down to inquire about this matter. Exin truthfully told them what happened on Black Armor Mountain. At first, everyone sighed with emotion and didn't think too much about it. Even He gang's elder brother, senior martial brother He Yi, who was well known in the Kunlun party, came over. In the end, he also left in silence and didn't make things difficult for Exin. No one believed that a little girl like Exin, who hadn't even formally entered the Kunlun party, would have the intention or ability to harm those two people. The following days were peaceful for a period of time. Soon, it was time for the Kunlun party's immortal appraisal assembly. At this time, a message from Jean Dan Friar, who had taken a liking to Exin, came from Kunlun Mountain. The gist of the message was that Dongfang Tao, a Taoist expert, had suffered more serious injuries than expected. He still had to go into closed-door meditation for a period of time, and it was unknown when he would come out. However, Exin was already of age. If she didn't go up the mountain to learn martial arts, she would probably be delayed. Therefore, according to Dongfang Tao's arrangements, the family sent Exin to Kunlun and she successfully entered a sect. In the end, Dongfang Tao arranged for her to become an official disciple in Baichao Tang. Speaking of which, the status of an official disciple was much higher than that of a servant disciple. An official disciple only needed to cultivate and did not need to do any work to obtain cultivation resources. Of course, the prerequisite for such treatment was that one had to be talented enough and have a strong background. In short, up to this point, Exin had been living a good life. She was full of hope for the future, happily cultivating on Kunlun Mountain with peace of mind. But a month later, the situation suddenly changed. He Gang, one of the three from that day, actually returned. According to him, he was surrounded by a pack of terrifying black jackals and crazily gnawed on him. Later, he accidentally fell off a cliff and happened to fall into a pool of water below. That was how he managed to escape. Even so, He Gang still suffered greatly. Not only was his handsome face completely ruined, his vitality was also greatly damaged. His cultivation was mostly gone and there were many serious injuries on his body. When he was discovered at the foot of Kunlun Mountain, he was already on the verge of death. No one knew how he managed to make it back. Fortunately, he had a powerful brother, He, who loved him dearly. When he found out about this, he immediately tried his best and used many good medicines and miraculous pills to save him. He even recovered most of his cultivation, which was a great fortune amidst the misfortune. But from then on, He Gang seemed to have suddenly changed into a different person, perhaps because he had received too much stimulation in the land of chaos. His personality was abnormally extreme, and he often quarreled and provoked others. Others, on account of his pitiful experience and He's face, would usually give him some leeway. Then, He Gang discovered Exin, who was also on Kunlun Mountain. It was hard to imagine what He Gang was thinking when he saw Exin. But Exin was very surprised at first. Although she was a little afraid when she saw He Gang's terrifying face, she was still happy that he had survived. But He Gang's reaction was beyond Exin's expectation. When he saw Exin, he was stunned for a long time before he stepped back. But soon, he suddenly rushed over with a roar, grabbed Exin's hand, and asked the two of them to become cultivation companions. Then, he began to grope her. Exin was scared out of her wits. Needless to say, she resisted with all her might. After she finally escaped, she soon heard that He Gang was spreading rumors in the Kunlun party. He said that when they went south to the land of chaos, the two of them were already in love and had privately pledged to marry each other. It was also because he was deeply in love with Exin that He Gang had risked his life to distract all the dogs when they encountered the terrifying pack of black jackals on the Black Armor Mountain, so that Exin could escape alone and he would be doomed eternally. But now, when Exin saw that his cultivation was damaged, especially his face, she actually turned her back on him. When she heard this, Exin was completely dumbfounded. And things took a turn for the worse, especially when He Gang's elder brother, He, felt sorry for his younger brother's misfortune and publicly said that Exin was ungrateful. For a while, there were many discussions about this matter in the Kunlun sect. Even if Exin tried her best to explain that the situation was not like that at that time, not many people openly expressed sympathy for her. At the same time, He Gang became even more entangled with her. He came to harass her every 2 or 3 days, and insisted that she become cultivation companions with him. The scene that Lu Qin saw at the edge of the forest in Shirpan Valley during the day was the scene that had been repeated in the past few days. Hearing this, Lu Qin finally understood and did not speak for a while. It was quiet inside and outside the mountain pavilion at this moment, only the light sound of the wind could be heard. Xian quietly looked up at Lu Qin, but found that sitting across the table, he was looking at her with a pair of bright eyes, and the expression in his eyes was a little strange. "Brother Lu, why are you looking at me like that?" For some reason, Xian suddenly felt a little guilty and carefully asked. Lu Qin looked at her, thought for a while and asked, "Before I met you, there was really nothing between you and he gang, right?" "No, really." Xian suddenly stood up, looking anxious, and loudly said, "Brother Lu, I swear to the heavens, there is absolutely no love affair between me and Senior Marshal Brother He. At that time, I only thought of him as an older brother, and followed him and Marshal Uncle Han to gain experience." Lu Qin nodded, indicating for her to calm down. Then he muttered to himself for a while and said, "This matter is not a big deal. Not to mention spiritual master Yuanying, even the sect's Jin Dan friar would be too lazy to care. Oh, speaking of which, don't you also have a backer? Ask your master Dongfang Tao to come out and say something. Although that He's prospects are good, but as far as I know, Dongfang Tao is a veteran Jin Dan friar, and has achieved Jin Dan for at least 10 years. With this kind of experience, many people would have to give him face." Xian's face was sullen, and her expression was full of grievance. She said, "Master Dongfang, his injuries are not light. That day, after arranging for me to enter the sect, he went into seclusion again. He only said that after he came out, he would perform the ceremony of becoming my disciple. Before that, he first let me follow Bai Chao Tang to practice some basic techniques. I really have no choice." Lu Qin was startled, shook his head, and quietly said to himself, "This old man is a good hands-off shopkeeper. Why do I feel that he is quite similar to that damn Baldy?" Chapter 92. Xian didn't hear him clearly. She asked, "Brother Lu, what did you say?" "Oh. Nothing." Lu Qin thought for a moment and said, "Did you tell your family? Your clan can be considered an aristocratic family in Kunwa City. After so many years, you must have a good relationship with the Kunlun party. Could you ask your elders to find someone to talk to you?" Xian smiled bitterly and said, "I did. My family also asked someone to speak on my behalf, but..." Her voice became gloomy and she said softly, "Our clan's current situation is just so. Xian didn't say anything else and Lu Qin didn't continue asking. Some principles had been the same since ancient times. Even if the world changed, it was still very difficult to change. Perhaps the clan had produced outstanding talents a long time ago and passed down the clan's foundation, but the world was very realistic. Now that you were weak, your voice naturally wouldn't be loud enough. Even friendships would slowly fade with the passage of time. A powerful Jin Dan friar was enough to establish a clan that could be passed down for generations. He was such a genius that everyone thought highly of. They believed that he would definitely become Jin Dan in the future. Many people even believed that he might have a chance to become the incomparably powerful Master Yuanying. With the existence of such a figure, it was obviously not worth it for those who were not interested in fighting against him for an ordinary family that had nothing to do with them. What's more, from the beginning to the end, he had never stepped forward to make things difficult for Xian. It was just that his brother admired the girl, so he pursued her wholeheartedly. It wasn't a matter of fighting and killing, so how could he intervene? This matter seems quite troublesome. Lu Qin sighed softly and said to Xian. Xian wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes and said, "Brother Lu, since you're so powerful, can you help me?" Lu Qin looked at Xian and saw that she was sitting there looking at him with eyes full of expectation. After a while, Lu Qin suddenly smiled and said, "Why should I help you? What's in it for me?" Xian was stunned as if she didn't expect Lu Qin to suddenly say something like this. After a while, she stammered, Brother Lu, No, I don't know. I think you're a good person and you treat me very well. I thought you'd help me. Lu Chen laughed involuntarily and said, who told you that I'm a good person? You're too simple-minded. No wonder you're being forced. Exin's face was bitter as if she didn't know what to say. In the end, she could only mumble, I just thought that Brother Lu helped me when we were in the disorienting lands, so I think you're a good person. Tisk. Lu Chen was speechless for a moment. He shook his head and thought for a while before saying, in any case, I'm not the kind of person you think I am. I can't work for free. If you want me to help you solve this matter, you'll have to pay me something. Oh, that's what I should do, Exin said repeatedly. Brother Lu, what do you want? As long as I have it, I'll give it to you. Looking at her anxious expression, it was obvious that she wanted nothing more than to get rid of He Gang's entanglement. It was obvious that she was about to go crazy. If that's the case, then repay me with your body, Lu Chen said. Exin was instantly dumbstruck. Her mouth was wide open as if she had turned into a stone. After a moment, she suddenly saw a faint smile hanging on the corner of Lu Chen's mouth. Only then did she suddenly come back to her senses. She stomped her feet in embarrassment and anger, and said angrily, Big Brother Lu, what are you doing? Lu Chen smiled and said, what's wrong? You can't take it after just one sentence. Lu Chen said, I saw that when He Gang came to pester you, you looked embarrassed, angry, and panic-stricken from beginning to end. You didn't even have the strength to fight back. Are your feelings then the same as now? Exin seemed to understand, but her cheeks still felt a little hot. She said in a low voice, more or less. Humph. Lu Chen sneered with a bit of undisguised mockery. Exin suddenly felt that her face was even hotter. Then she heard Lu Chen say, I'll help you with this matter, but I haven't thought about what the reward will be. I'll owe you for now. Just remember to help me with this matter in the future. Okay. Hearing Lu Chen's words, Exin suddenly felt that she had seen a ray of light in the darkness. She hurriedly agreed and then looked at Lu Chen with a face full of expectation, as if she had seen an omnipotent god. Her gaze was so hot that even a thick-skinned person like Lu Chen couldn't bear it. He glared at her and then said, I've thought about this matter from beginning to end. I think your biggest problem now is that you have no way to ask for help. If your Jin Dan stage master comes out, maybe you won't be in such a difficult situation. Exin said without hesitation, of course, Master Dongfang loves me the most. If he comes out, he definitely won't sit idly by. Well, then it's clear. The most important thing now is to let you endure until your master comes out. There are ways, very simple, 2 ways. Exin's eyes suddenly brightened. Looking at Lu Chen with some admiration, she quickly said, Brother Lu, quickly teach me. Lu Chen stretched out the first finger and said, First, you pretend to be courteous to He Gang and pretend to be perfunctory. First, you can calm him down. If necessary, you can even let him take advantage of you. Endure until your master comes out and officially accepts you as a disciple. Then you can turn hostile. Exin was stunned for a moment. She suddenly shook her head and resolutely said, No. Lu Chen looked at her and asked, Why? Exin's face was full of disgust and said, That person is so disgusting now. Every time he comes to pester me, he talks and does things like he wants to eat me. I can't stand it. Lu Chen nodded to show that he understood and then said, Since that's the case, then there's a second way. But you should also understand the current situation, so to use this method, it depends on whether you are ruthless enough. Exin looked a little confused and said, Brother Lu, what do you want me to do? What do you mean ruthless enough? Lu Chen smiled and waved at her. Exin walked to his side and slightly bent down. Then she saw Lu Chen whispering something in her ear. As Exin listened, the expression on her face slowly changed. First, she was indescribably shocked, then her body trembled slightly, as if she was excited and afraid. In the middle, there was a complicated expression of blushing. After a long while, she straightened her body in a daze and turned to look at Lu Chen. She said with some difficulty, Is this okay? At this moment, it was the dead of night. That man was silent, just quietly sitting by the table in the pavilion. For some reason, Xin suddenly had a strange illusion. The man in front of her seemed to suddenly become especially strange. At that moment, Xin only felt that the surrounding darkness was like a tide, surrounding that man, making his face unclear, making him hide in the darkness. Even that faint smile that he occasionally revealed seemed to carry a trace of the coldness and sternness of the night. After a while, sitting in the darkness, Lu Chen said indifferently, I already said, I'm not a good person. Chapter 93. Time flowed by as the moon set and the clouds rose. Within the enormous Kunlun Mountains, countless people were busy walking their own paths. However, compared to the towering mountains, people were often like extremely tiny ants. They were busy doing their own thing all day long, yet they forgot to raise their heads to look at the boundless sky. Xin walked on the road of Rockpan Mountain, her face calm, without any extra expression. She was an official disciple, so she did not have to work all day long in exchange for a meager pay like the handyman disciples. However, she still needed help with some things like sorting and identifying spiritual materials. Besides, this kind of work also had great benefits. She could identify many useful spiritual materials, familiarize herself with their properties, and lay a solid foundation for her future alchemy or exploration. There were many huge rocks on Rockpan Mountain. One of the branch halls of Baichao Tang was built on the big rocks on the mountain. From afar, one could see the flying eaves and blue tiles. It looked extraordinary. Xin was not the only one on the road. There were many disciples of Baichao Tang who had the same status as her coming and going. Many people noticed Xin, and many people pointed at her and whispered to each other. Rumors were bound to spread at all times. Xin didn't look at her fellow disciples. As she walked, the conversation she had with Lu Chen a few days ago, as well as some of the instructions he had given her after that, couldn't help but echo in her mind. In the vicinity of Rock Mountain, from 100 Herb Hall's branch, are there any female Jindan masters with profound cultivation and bad tempers? This was what Lu Chen had asked her that day. There are many female disciples in Baichao Tang. There are also a few female Jindan friar who are successful in cultivation. The one who came recently is Martial Uncle Yen of Melaleuca japonica. She is strict, and all the disciples are afraid of her. Great. God is on your side. But the great cultivators of Jindan state never bother to know, and they don't care about our trivial matters. Then we'll force her to know, force her to take care of it. Ah. How can I do that? That depends on whether you are ruthless enough, Big Brother Lu, you're saying that again. I always feel scared when I hear it. The warm sunlight shone down on Xin's body, making her feel a trace of warmth. She took a deep breath and forced herself to reveal a trace of a smile before walking towards the hall. The day passed uneventfully. In the afternoon, Xin walked out of the main hall and began to walk down the mountain. When she arrived at the foot of the mountain, she pretended to casually glance at the flat and spacious spiritual fields. She saw many odd-job disciples working hard in the spiritual fields at the foot of the mountain. Unsurprisingly, she found a familiar face among them. Inconspicuous, Lu Chen stood in a spiritual field and smiled at her from afar. For some reason, seeing that smile, Xin seemed to feel a little more support in her heart, and her originally panicked mind calmed down a little. But before she could think of what to do, suddenly, a gloomy and even somewhat hostile voice suddenly came from not far away. Junior Sister E, what a coincidence. We meet again. Xin's heart jumped, and her hands subconsciously clenched into fists. Then she turned her head to look, and what entered her eyes was that extremely ugly and frightening face. Xin slowly lowered her head, and there seemed to be a little fear on her face. She said in a low voice, "Senior brother he gang looked at Exian's pretty face, and saw that the fear and weakness not only did not damage her beauty in the slightest, but instead added a bit of sadness and delicateness to her beauty. He felt as if a scorching flame suddenly burned in his heart, like a wild beast suddenly roaring in his body. His eyes revealed a look of greed and desire, but his tone was very calm. He only smiled and said, "Junior sister I have something to say to you." Exian slightly raised her eyes, looked at that face, and found that when he gang smiled, the scar on his face twitched, that face became more and more frightening. She couldn't help but take a step back, and after 2 hurried breaths, said, "Senior brother if you have something to say, you can say it here." "Here?" He gang sneered, looked at the many handyman disciples in the surrounding spiritual fields, and a look of contempt appeared in his eyes. He said, "There are too many people here, junior sister let's go to a place with fewer people to talk." As he spoke, he gang walked towards the forest that day. Exian's expression changed slightly, and she looked a little hesitant. He gang suddenly turned back, and with a ferocious look, he shouted fiercely, "Junior sister Exian's face showed a painful expression, but in the end, she finally slowly walked out, and followed he gang into the forest. This scene fell into the eyes of many handyman disciples, and even many official disciples of Bai Chao Tang who passed by and watched from afar also saw it. For a moment, everyone looked at each other. The forest was very quiet. He gang looked very happy that Exian had to follow him, and he walked in front proudly. Exian, on the other hand, slowly followed behind him. Lu Chen's words to her echoed in her mind. Every single word sounded simple and clear, but it was as if a knife was stabbing into her heart, and it was filled with pain and determination. "I told you to be ruthless, not to be ruthless to he gang, because it's useless. Nowadays, there are countless rumors about he gang. Even if you kill him, you won't be able to shut people's mouths. Instead, you'll become the target of gossip, and your family will definitely not be able to withstand He's vengeance. He gang is the one who wants you, and wants to skin you alive. I don't know about He, but maybe someone like him needs all the resources to help him break through to the Jin Dan. He might even be tempted by your family's property. What do you think? You'll lose both your wealth and your family. Can you stand it? Can't stand it. That's why you have to be ruthless to yourself. You have to be ruthless to yourself to the point where everyone is scared and in disbelief. Then, everyone will believe you. In this world, how can there be such a comfortable thing as reaping without sowing? Even if there is, it's not between you and me. That's why you have to be ruthless to yourself." Lu Chen said with a smile. Exian recalled that night, Lu Chen's voice and blurry face in the dark. She suddenly shuddered. She stared fixedly at He gang, who had stopped in front of her and turned around to look at her with a hateful smile. Her eyes twitched, and her body trembled slightly. All of this fell into He gang's eyes. He looked at Exian as if he was looking at a weak little chick. A tyrannical emotion seemed to rise from his heart. That terrifying scene of countless ferocious black dogs barking and biting each other flashed across his mind, causing him to tremble uncontrollably. He was scared. He was scared to death. Every time he dreamed of that scene, he would be scared to the point of peeing his pants. And every time he saw Exian's beautiful face, he would angrily think, why was she able to escape safely, while he had to suffer like that? Everything was her fault. I want to let her taste that kind of pain. Ruthlessly ravage her, torture her, make her scream in pain. He crazily imagined it, as if this was the only way he could feel uncontrollable pleasure. It was at this time, He gang heard Exian open her mouth, and with a trembling voice, she said, "Senior brother, don't force me like this, okay?" That young girl seemed like she was about to cry. There were tears in the corner of her eyes, and as if she had gathered all her courage, she said this to him. Chapter 94. He gang sneered, his white teeth peeking out from his missing mouth. He looked especially ferocious, like a wolf or tiger. Exin took another step back and said in a trembling voice, "Don't force me, senior brother." He gang spat and said fiercely, "I want to force you, so what? I'll tell you clearly, I want you. Follow me faithfully for the rest of your life. When my big brother reaches the golden core or nascent soul stage, you and your clan will enjoy endless wealth and glory." Exin's face was pale as she shook her head. After a while, she smiled bitterly. "Our family. So you really coveted our family property?" Gang suddenly frowned, as if he felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't think of what it was, so he didn't bother to say more. With a wild laugh, he strode towards Exin, and at the same time, reached out to grab her, and said with a smile, "Junior sister I've missed you for a long time, today you," clang. A crisp sound abruptly interrupted Gang's words. His body stopped, only to see Exin pull out a sharp dagger and hold it horizontally in front of her. Her face carried a bit of determination, mixed with a bit of pain and despair, and even a bit of madness that Gang had never seen before. It was vaguely similar to the look in Gang's eyes before. Gang jumped in fright, but he sneered. "What are you doing? Trying to scare me with a dagger? Stab me if you dare. Let's see if anyone from your family can survive after you kill me." Exin gritted her teeth and stared blankly in front of her. Her vision blurred and she could almost hear her own painful and hopeless question from that day. "Why, Brother Lu, why? They were the ones who bullied me, but you want me to be cruel to myself?" Lu Chen's calm yet cold voice came from the darkness, echoing in her ears. "Because you're weak. But there's no justice in this world." "Yes, there's no justice, there's no reason. This is how the world works. Either you lie down and admit defeat and allow others to bully you, or you try your best to find some methods within your power, even if those methods seem painful and uncomfortable. You want me to give you justice and righteousness? I'm sorry, I don't have any. I'm not a good person, I can only teach you these things." Exin suddenly screamed, like a little beast that was forced into a desperate situation. Her fear was not directed towards the ugly man in front of her, but rather towards an invisible aura. She trembled all over. When Gang saw this, he was so excited that his body was trembling. He let out a roar, and his eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly rushed over and grinned, "Stinking whore, today I'll call you, damn whore, today I'll call you." The low muffled sound wasn't loud, but it was like a sudden clap of thunder. Gang instantly stopped in his tracks and looked at Exin with a stunned and incredulous expression. That girl, that beautiful girl, had a pained expression on her face at this moment. However, her hand was gripping the dagger tightly, and she had stabbed it into her own body with a backhand. The dagger was incomparably sharp and pierced through her left shoulder. It could be imagined that Exin used all her strength. Dark red blood gushed out like a fountain and dyed half of Exin's clothes red. Exin's pale lips trembled slightly. She slowly pulled the dagger out from her flesh. The pain was like a tide that was about to drown this fragile woman. There were a few times when she felt that she was about to collapse. She was about to be unable to bear it, but for some reason, she still stood there, standing in the pool of blood, coldly looking at the dumbfounded Gang opposite her. Suddenly, she felt a sense of pleasure amidst the pain. That ugly man was not as strong as she thought. Then she slowly lowered her head. Looking at the bloody wound, she shook her head. That ghostly cold voice seemed to be emotionless. Vaguely, it was saying terrible words to her. "Since you have decided to be ruthless, then be more ruthless. Since you have decided to do it, then you must do it to the extreme. Isn't that right? Isn't that right?" She smiled bitterly. Within the bloody light, there was a terrifying decisiveness that shouldn't have been present at her age. She suddenly screamed, and then held the blade upside down. She suddenly flipped it over and directly cut off her own flower-like, jade-like face. Gang was scared silly. At this time, he was really scared out of his wits. He stood there, dumbfounded at this bloody scene. He was completely at a loss, and his mind was blank. The feeling of the cold blade cutting through flesh made one's body feel like it was going to fall apart. Exin's body trembled non-stop. She gasped for breath, as if this was the only way she could persevere. But in her weak body, there seemed to be an unimaginable terrifying power that kept her going until now. Fresh blood dyed her body red. It was a ghastly sight to behold. However, she was like a phoenix rising from nirvana in the pool of blood. She looked down at the ugly man from above and saw the fear in his eyes. Thus, there was a bit of contempt in her eyes. She thought to herself, so, what Brother Lu said was true. She laughed maniacally, shook her head, and did not look at Gang again. She suddenly raised the dagger and slashed her clothes, directly cutting several wounds on her body. In an instant, blood spurted out. Then, she threw the dagger away and used her hands to tear open her clothes, revealing a piece of originally snow-white soft skin that was now dyed red with blood. The beautiful body that was hidden under the clothes looked unusually bright red, and there was a kind of tragedy that could not be looked at directly. Then, she raised her head again. This forest was as quiet as the bridge of helplessness in the underworld. It was like the terrifying sea of blood in the hell of evil spirits. She didn't know why, but there was suddenly a relieved smile on her face. She just smiled like that. Then, she suddenly let out an incomparably sharp scream. She staggered out of the forest. Along the way, blood flowed all over the ground, dyeing the entire road red. Gang still hadn't come back to his senses. He stood there in a daze. His eyes fell on the dark red pool of blood on the ground. It seemed that he still hadn't broken free from the tragic scene that had just occurred. After a while, outside the forest, there was a sudden commotion. Some people cried out, some people shouted angrily. There was also a woman's voice that was already crying. Someone, quickly come and save junior sister E. Medicine. Who has medicine to stop the bleeding? Why is she bleeding so much? No, quickly go to the mountain and ask Marshal Aunt Yen to come down. Only she can save junior sister E. In the midst of the chaos, the commotion became bigger and bigger. It seemed to gradually converge into a raging tide, crazily surging in all directions. In the spirit field behind the crowd, a man stood far away and watched this terrifying scene from beginning to end. When the crowd gathered, he expressionlessly raised his head and looked at the sky. The sky was blue and cloudless. Today was a sunny day. Chapter 95. The incident that took place at the foot of Rock Mountain that day was witnessed by many Bai Chao Tang disciples and even more Chor's disciples. When the blood-soaked woman staggered out of the forest, the horrifying scene instantly shocked everyone. Dark red blood flowed on that beautiful face, piercing into everyone's eyes like a sharp knife, causing their eyes to sting. They held their breath and tensed up involuntarily. Like a boulder thrown into the water, it instantly set off a monstrous wave. The Kunlun party was, after all, a prestigious and upright sect. Jean Dan Friar Melaleuca Japonica, who was in charge of the Bai Chao Tang sect on Rock Mountain, immediately rushed down the mountain after receiving the news to protect Xin and heal her. At the same time, someone noticed that someone was trying to sneak out of the forest. It was Gang, so he immediately shouted for them to expose him. Thinking of all the things that happened before, the crowd was instantly agitated and many people cursed out loud. However, Gang's elder brother, He was too famous. Although the crowd was angry, no one dared to stop them. At this moment, the white-haired Melaleuca Japonica suddenly appeared next to Gang without saying a word. Then, she slapped him hard in the face. That afternoon, at the edge of the forest at the foot of Rock Mountain, everyone heard the crisp sound of bones breaking and the man's heart-wrenching scream. Of course, no one paid attention to him. By evening, the incident had spread throughout the Kunlun party and caused a sensation in all sections. The Yi family of Kunwu City had rushed to the mountain after hearing the news. It was said that the scene was so tragic that the girl's mother fainted when she saw her daughter. Exian's father and other relatives and friends were all furious. Bai Chao Tang's sect was one of the most important sects in the Kunlun party. It was powerful and well-established. In just one day, 2 Yuanying Jinren and 7 Jin Dan Friar immortals came directly to Rock Mountain. At night, the huge mountain was still brightly lit. Countless people came in and out. The sky was full of colorful lights and colorful rainbows flew across the sky, making the moon and stars dim. It was the immortal masters and Jinren who came on clouds and wind, like the eve of a storm. He Gang wanted to escape, but Melaleuca Japonica broke his bones on the spot and caught him. He was thrown at the foot of Rock Mountain, howling and screaming. No one came near and no one dared to save him. When night fell, someone from the Rock Mountain passed down the order. He Gang was tied up and hung on a big tree in front of the mountain, facing the boundless spirit fields and countless onlookers of the odd job disciples. This was, of course, an undisguised insult and venting of anger. He Gang screamed and defended himself, saying that Exian was a bitch and that she did everything herself. She stabbed herself and it had nothing to do with He Gang. In the cold mountain wind, He Gang's voice gradually became hoarse and weak. In the end, others could only hear him calling his brother's name in a low voice. But this night, he never showed up. He Gang was also hung for the whole night. Within the sects of Kunlun, every hall on every mountain peak seemed to have smelled something that night. Everyone was silent. And among the huge mountains of Kunlun, there seemed to be a sense of mutual hostility that night. The next morning, there was news from the powerful, Heavenly Soldier Hall, which was in charge of the magic weapon refining and the forging of celestial weapons in the Kunlun party. Dukan Jinren, who had a high reputation in the Heavenly Soldier Hall, summoned his most beloved disciple, He, to the famous, Heavenly Fire Hall, of the Kunlun party and reprimanded him for a long time. He knelt on the ground and did not dare to speak. It was even said that Dukan Jinren, in his rage, directly hit and slapped and kicked He, causing He to repeatedly kowtow in front of the hall until his face was bruised and bleeding. However, when the news came, the stone mountain did not seem to be moved at all. The entire mountain was silent, like an angry giant beast, coldly looking at its opponent in the Kunlun mountain range. The atmosphere in the Kunlun party became more and more tense the next day. The disciples of the Heavenly Soldier Hall suddenly could not get elixirs and elixirs from the elixir room. In the argument, the disciples on both sides, especially the disciples of Bai Chao Tang, became more and more provocative. The situation even seemed to be worsening. But on this night, the head of the Kunlun party, Immortal Idol Month, suddenly arrived at the Stone Mountain. Together with her was the chief elder of the Heavenly Soldier Hall, Dukan Jinren. They first went to visit Exian, who was seriously injured and on the verge of death. Of course, under the care and treatment of so many powerful cultivators of Bai Chao Tang, Exian's injuries had greatly improved. Then, Immortal Idol Month came forward to host the meeting. She summoned Dukan Jinren and the 2 immortal masters of Bai Chao Tang, Qian Deng and Ming Zhu. They found a quiet room to talk behind closed doors. They chatted for half a day. However, when they walked out of the door, everyone on the Rock Mountain saw the 4 highly respected Yuanying Jinren smiling. They were like celestial beings who did not eat the food of the mortal world. They greeted each other, looked forward to the bright future of Kunlun, talked about the hardships on the road of cultivation, and only said that the celestial path was brilliant, and that it was the right path of the mortal world. Dukan Jinren then took his leave and floated away. During this time, he never mentioned He Gang, who was still hanging on the big tree at the foot of the stone mountain. The people of Bai Chao Tang also seemed to have forgotten about this matter. After this, the matter quickly subsided. He Gang was released after being hung for 3 days. His brother, He, picked him up and sent him out of Kunlun Mountain. He found a house in Kunwa City to stay and recuperate. It seemed that he wouldn't return to the mountain for a while. After finishing this matter, he immediately announced to everyone that he would follow his master's order and immediately go into closed-door training to comprehend and break through the incomparably difficult Jin Dan realm. Everything was like a breeze blowing. After the turbulence, it finally gradually calmed down. The majestic Kunlun was still the same as before. Everything was as usual. Late at night, the stone mountain was no longer as lively and tense as it was a few days ago. After the lights dimmed, there was only silence. It was unknown how many people had entered the land of dreams at this moment. The darkness of the night seemed to be everywhere. A shadow that blended with the darkness quietly moved forward in the darkness. It silently passed through the houses, bypassed the guards, and finally stopped outside a house in the depths of the mountain. The window was gently closed. As if the night wind blew in, it made a squeaking sound and swayed a little. On the bed in the house, Exian turned over and rubbed her eyes sleepily. Suddenly, her body trembled and she sat up abruptly. She found that there was suddenly an extra shadow beside her bed. But before she could scream, a large hand had already covered her mouth, forcing her to swallow all her cries. Chapter 96. Woo! Woo! Exian let out a muffled cry and struggled desperately, but the black figure suddenly leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Exian's body suddenly stiffened, and then she stopped struggling. She calmed down, only her eyes in the darkness still revealed a trace of horror. The hand covering her mouth slowly withdrew, and the black figure still sat on the edge of her bed. A pair of bright eyes appeared in the darkness, and then his appearance was gradually seen clearly. It was Lu Qin. Brother Lu. Exian softly called out, and after the shock in her eyes, there was finally some joy. She did not know why, but she suddenly felt sour in her eyes, and after a moment, 2 lines of tears silently flowed down from her pale face. The tears streaked across her white and tender skin, and the bandaged wound on one side of her face was still not removed, making her look particularly miserable. Lu Qin quietly looked at the girl sitting in the darkness crying silently, sighed, and then reached out to wipe away the tears on her face, and said, "Don't cry, you did well." Exian stared at him in a daze, her lips slightly trembling, and the scenes of these days flashed through her mind. Suddenly, she realized that so many people from the same sect, so many relatives, and even her parents, seemed to be separated from them by a layer. In these few days, she desperately suppressed her fear, endured her nervousness, and only at this time, in this dark and quiet night, in front of this man who seemed to be one with the darkness like a shadow, did she suddenly feel a trace of relief. He knew all the secrets, and there was no need to pretend anything in front of him. Exian just looked at him like this, and unknowingly, tears flowed down her face again, and even her voice trembled and choked. "Lu, brother Lu. I'm so scared." Lu Qin raised his hand, as if he wanted to comfort Exian, but when he just raised his hand, he suddenly felt a warm body jumping into his arms, tightly hugging his arm, desperately suppressing her trembling voice and crying, "I'm so scared, brother Lu, at that time I was so scared, I was in so much pain. I've never been in so much pain in my life. I saw myself bleeding so much, my whole body was covered in blood, I even cut my own face, from now on I am an ugly person." Sob sob, sob 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 sob. Lu Chen's hands froze in the air, for a moment he did not know whether to raise or let go, and could only let Exian vent in his arms. After a while, he found that Exian did not seem to show signs of calming down, so he could only gently pat the girl's shoulder and whispered, okay, it's all over." Perhaps his comfort had some effect. Exian's crying slowly quieted down. After a while, she slowly left Lu Chen's body, lowered her head and sat on the bed again, but kept using her hand to wipe the tears on her face. A hand held a handkerchief and handed it to her. Exian hesitated for a moment, took it, and while wiping her face, she whispered, "Thank you." Well, this is the final result of the matter. The room was still dark. In the darkness, Lu Chen and Exian sat on the same bed, somewhat strangely and somewhat inexplicably ambiguous. Separated by some distance, they listened to Lu Chen talk about what happened these days. Finally, as if coming to a conclusion, Lu Qin said, if nothing unexpected happens, he will be grounded for a very long time in closed-door meditation, and he gang is currently recuperating in Kunwa City, but it will be very difficult for him to return to the Kunlun party. Perhaps he will be expelled from the sect. Xian's breathing seemed to quicken in the darkness for a while, and then with a hint of disbelief, she said, really? Really? Xian was silent for a moment, and then she let out a long breath, as if a big stone that had been pressing on her heart for a long time had finally been moved. After a while, she sighed softly, our Kunlun party still has its justice. But this time, because of me, they actually alarmed so many seniors and elders, really. Before she finished speaking, Xian suddenly saw Lu Chen, who was next to her, turn his head to look at her. A pair of bright but deep eyes stared at her. For some reason, Xian suddenly felt weak in her heart, and her voice involuntarily dropped. After a moment, she stammered, "Did I say something wrong?" Lu Chen looked at her with a faint smile and said, "Do you really think that Bai Chao Tang and Heavenly Soldier Hall made such a big movement just for you?" Xian was stunned. After a while, she said with a stutter, "Didn't I? In the beginning, of course it was for you. That day when you came out of the forest, the scene was bloody and tragic. No one could stand it. So, including your martial uncle Melaleuca Japonica, she angrily made a move because she couldn't help you. But what kind of influential family is the Kunlun party? There are so many masters and recluses in Bai Chao Tang. How could they rashly fall out with such an important hall like Heavenly Soldier Hall for the sake of you, an insignificant new disciple? Before, even you didn't dare to believe that it would be like this, right?" Xian silently nodded and said, "Then why on earth, Brother Lu?" Lu Qin smiled and said, "Because there are still people who don't like the He brothers." "Who?" "Just like you, a disciple of a sect from an aristocratic family in Kunwa City." Xian was startled and said with some doubt, "That can't be. Although my family is also one of the aristocratic families in Kunwa City, to be honest, our family has been very ordinary these years. We haven't produced any particularly outstanding talents, and the other aristocratic families rarely pay attention to us." Lu Qin said indifferently, "It has nothing to do with this. It's just that all the people from aristocratic families have different circumstances since childhood, so they naturally more or less have a sense of superiority. When some people see you, won't they think of something else? What if the person that he gang likes is a girl from another aristocratic family? Aristocratic families have confidence, strength, and influence, so they naturally aren't afraid. But what about those small and medium-sized aristocratic families? Do they deserve to be bullied by this rising young man? Taking a step back, even if they are aristocratic families now, what if they become like the Yi family in a few decades or hundreds of years? At that time, what will their daughters do when they meet this kind of person?" He sat quietly in the darkness and looked at the injured girl. He was calm and even faintly cold as he said, "So the key to this matter lies in the place where it happened. If you were bullied by He gang in the land of chaos, or even worse than today, the Kunlun party's reaction wouldn't be as big. But this time, it happened in the Kunlun party and under the eyes of all the Kunlun disciples. This is a slap in the face of the several hundred aristocratic families in Kunwa City. It would be strange if they didn't kill the He brothers." Xian stared blankly at Lu Chen who was sitting in the shadows. Looking at his deep eyes that were faintly discernible in the darkness, she suddenly said softly, "Brother Lu, When you first helped me think of the idea, did you already think of everything that would happen later?" Chapter 97. Lu Chen glanced at Xian and said, "Why do you ask?" Xian lowered her head silently. After a long while, she whispered, "Nothing. I just feel that Brother Lu, you are thinking so far ahead. You are so powerful. Do you regret letting me help you?" Xian's body trembled slightly. She quickly shook her head and said, No. I didn't mean that. You helped me for my own good. I know that. I am grateful to you from the bottom of my heart. I am especially. Do you remember that you promised to do something for me? Lu Qin suddenly interrupted her. Xian was stunned for a moment and said, yes. Lu Qin said lightly, that's good. After this matter, no matter what, 100 Herb Hall will value you even more. Plus, you're someone that Dongfang Tao has taken a liking to and your talent isn't bad, so your position in 100 Herb Hall in the future will be much better than it is now. This is good for both of us. Xian was speechless. She didn't know what to say for a moment. Lu Qin stood up and said, it's late. You should rest early. I'm leaving. Xian thought of something and said, Brother Lu, I remember that there are guards outside. How did you get in? Lu Qin stood in the darkness and smiled slightly. He didn't answer her question. He stepped back and quickly merged into the darkness. Xian widened her eyes and looked towards the darkness, only to see a few faint ripples suddenly appearing on the quiet surface of the water in the deep darkness. When she looked again carefully, there was no sign of anyone. Silently shuttling through the darkness, like the shadow of the moon, he came down from the top of the rock mountain without anyone noticing. Lu Qin looked up at the night sky and saw that it was already late at night. It was already past midnight. It was already the curfew time in the Kunlun party. Speaking of this curfew, it was a special rule in the Kunlun party. Other cultivation sects rarely had such restrictions. After all, the cultivators who practiced immortality and refinement were all strong and energetic. It was not a big deal even if they didn't sleep for a day and night. But in the Kunlun party, this rule of forbidding the disciples to go out after midnight had been around for a long time. It was said that it could even be traced back to the early days of the Kunlun party, which had a history of thousands of years. In short, the Kunlun sect was a famous sect with a lot of rules. Coupled with the name of restraining its disciples to concentrate on cultivation, it was actually not particularly strange. Just like that, they persisted year after year. But of course, the so-called curfew could not be completely empty. Such a large mountain, such a large territory, if there were no guards patrolling, wouldn't it have been looted by countless thieves? Therefore, in the darkness of the night, although the nearby mountain path was quiet, there would occasionally be a group of patrolling guards passing by. Lu Qin walked quietly on the mountain road. When there were guards, he would often hide in advance. The guards, who were usually at least in the Foundation realm, seemed to have never noticed a low-level handyman disciple like him wandering outside late at night. Rock Mountain was where the official disciples of the Baichao Tang lived. The handyman disciples lived some distance away. Lu Qin walked and soon passed a fork in the road. A stone staircase extended up from the side of the mountain road. Lu Qin paused and remembered that this was the pavilion where he and Xian met late at night a few days ago. Thinking about what he said that night and Xian's appearance at that time, then thinking about how things seemed to have turned upside down in just a few days, Lu Qin felt a little emotional, but he did not intend to stop and continued to walk forward. The footsteps gradually faded away and Lu Chen's figure also disappeared into the darkness. But after a while, in this quiet mountain forest, as the cold night wind blew, a blurry figure suddenly walked out from the gloomy pavilion halfway up the mountain. The figure was that of a slender woman. Because it was too dark, it was impossible to see her appearance clearly. One could only faintly see that she was standing on the edge of the pavilion, gazing in the direction that Lu Qin had left. The night wind blew, causing her clothes and hair to float. A flash of light flitted through the night. It was a scarlet feather shawl draped over her shoulder. She silently stood in the darkness. After a while, she turned around and walked toward the summit. The days in Kunlun Mountain once again calmed down. The He brothers went into seclusion, and Mount Li went into seclusion. Afterwards, this matter was quickly forgotten. Everyone once again began to live the same leisurely days as before, cultivating, refining, and competing to become immortals. In the spiritual fields at the base of Rockpan Mountain, the various kinds of spiritual plants had also reached the point of maturity. Baichao Tang sent people down to take the harvest with great familiarity. Then, according to the rules, the surplus harvested spiritual plants were given to the odd job disciples. Afterwards, they exchanged them on the spot. Basically everyone exchanged them for spirit stones. The number of spirit stones varied, but this was the first time that most of the odd job disciples had extra money on hand. Thus, before they began planting the next batch of spiritual fields, they had half a month of comfortable days to pass. Many people were already calculating what kind of miraculous medicine they should exchange for to assist in their cultivation, or perhaps they should inquire about whether the sect had better cultivation methods they could purchase. Lu Chen's harvest was also not bad. He had obtained 30 spirit stones, which was considered a lot among the odd job disciples. However, before the spirit stones had warmed up in his bosom, an uninvited guest came to find him. "Treat, Brother Lu." When Exin found Lu Chen, she was smiling so happily that even her eyes seemed to be squinting. Although on the night when she was injured, Exin still seemed to be a little uneasy, but as her injuries improved, she still secretly looked at Lu Chen in a new light. She secretly regarded him as her most trustworthy friend, often sneaking over to talk to him. On this day, after receiving the spirit stones, Exin came to his door to ask for some money. Lu Chen unhappily rolled his eyes at this smiling young girl. "Your family is obviously rich, why do you always think of a pauper like me?" Exin smiled. "That's not the same. It's especially delicious to eat your treat." Lu Chen said, "You've learned bad things." Exin pulled him away and said, "That's because I learned bad things from you." "Less nonsense, let's go, let's go. Besides, I haven't seen Atsu for a long time. You always said it wasn't good to go up the mountain, so you left it in Kunwa City. It's so pitiful." Lu Chen couldn't dissuade her, so he had no choice but to follow her. However, he hadn't gone down the mountain for quite some time, so he also wanted to find some free time to go to Old Ma's place to take a look. The two of them walked all the way to the southern mountain gate of the Kunlun party. Just as they were about to pass under the majestic memorial archway of the mountain gate and leave the mountain, they suddenly saw a sudden commotion coming from below. The Kunlun disciples walking in front of them suddenly made way for a path. Soon after, a group of people walked over. Lu Chen and Exin didn't know what was going on. They were a bit puzzled, but they still followed the crowd and stood to the side. Before long, that group of people walked past them. The leader was an old man with white hair and a youthful complexion. He looked like an immortal, and his aura was truly extraordinary. He seemed to be an expert who had achieved the Tao. Walking next to this imposing old man was a little girl. She looked about 10 years old, had an ethereal temperament, and was extremely beautiful. Moreover, the most amazing thing about her was that despite her young age, she seemed to have a kind of cold and holy aura. She was like a white lotus on a snowy peak, making people not dare to approach her. Lu Chen, who was standing to the side, suddenly frowned. His gaze fell on the girl's face, and he discovered that he had seen this incomparably holy girl before. Chapter 98. Perhaps she sensed something. The girl, who had been expressionless and cold all along the way, suddenly glanced at the side of the road when she walked past Lu Chen. Lu Chen happened to be looking at her as well. Their gazes met in midair. After a brief collision, they parted as if nothing had happened. The young lady with a peerlessly beautiful appearance, aloof and outstanding temperament went all the way up the mountain. It was only then that the numerous Kunlun disciples at the mountain gate heaved a sigh of relief. They whispered to each other, but it seemed that no one knew the young lady's identity. However, many people recognized the old man who walked at the front. He was the powerful Jin Dan Friar Zhuoxian of their sect. His identity and status weren't simple. He was the junior brother of the current sect master of Kunlun, Reverend Idle Month. At the same time, he was also the second disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan, who cultivated in closed-door cultivation on the Winter Peak, one of the 4 wondrous peaks in the sky and clouds. The little girl, who was personally brought up the mountain by a person with strength and background that couldn't be underestimated, naturally attracted a lot of people's attention. Soon, some people guessed that she might be the new disciple that Master Zhuoxian had just accepted. That was the good fortune that the little girl had accumulated over several lifetimes. When Lu Chen walked out of the mountain gate, he looked back and saw that the group of people had already disappeared into the distance. His eyes flashed, but in the end, he gently shook his head and smiled. There was a strange expression on his face. "Brother Lu, what are you smiling about?" Exan asked when she saw his expression. "Nothing." Lu Chen answered perfunctorily and said with a smile, "Let's go. We'll go to Kungwu City and see if that stupid dog has starved to death." Exan agreed with a smile. Soon after, she suddenly glared at Lu Chen and said with a somewhat suspicious attitude, "Brother Lu, could it be that you entrusted the wrong person to make Atsu starve? Even if I starve to death, I won't be able to reach it." In the deserted Black Hill Pavilion, the fatty old ma angrily complained to Lu Chen, "I say, Lu Chen, where did you find such a vicious dog? He's too hateful." "Atsu is not a vicious dog." Exion's voice came from the side. At this moment, she was squatting on the ground with a smile on her face. She threw a few words here and then turned away. The shiny black dog Atsu was jumping around her happily, wagging its tail and rubbing its head against Exion's body. From time to time, it happily stuck out its tongue to lick Exion's face and hands, making Exion giggle non-stop. "What's wrong? You look a little haggard," Lu Chen said to Old Ma with a smile. "Nonsense, you have such a dog at home, how can it make people happy?" Old Ma said angrily. "What's wrong with Atsu? I remember that this dog is very stupid, but it seems to be quite honest." Old Ma snorted and said, "I've never seen such a greedy dog. It seems to think about eating all day long. Other dogs need to eat for 3 days, but it can finish in 1 day. And no matter if it's raw or cooked, no matter where I hide, this dog always seems to be able to dig 3 feet into the ground and find me. In the end, I became so angry that I stopped buying food, and it actually began to steal the spirit herbs on my counter." Huh? Lu Chen was also a little surprised when he heard this. He said, "How can this be? I didn't notice it before." As he said this, he waved to Atsu and called out, "Atsu, come here." The black dog immediately jumped over happily. Its movements were vigorous, although its hind legs were still limping. Lu Chen squatted down and touched Atsu's head. He looked at it again and found that Atsu seemed to have grown a lot this time, and its fur was bright and smooth. It seemed that it really ate well. He looked up at Old Ma and smiled. Then, Old Ma glared at him. "You took good care of it," Lu Chen said to Old Ma seriously. "I think you are very suitable to raise a dog. Raise your head." Old Ma waved his hand and said, "Take it away quickly, or I will kill it sooner or later." Lu Chen smiled and wanted to say something, but Exion next to him came over and said with a smile, "Brother Lu, let's take Atsu back to the mountain." "Ah, that's good." Before Lu Chen could speak, Old Ma had already come over and agreed with a smile, not giving Lu Chen a chance to refuse. Lu Chen pushed the fat man away and said to Exion, "I am still a handyman disciple. It is not convenient for me to take it up the mountain." Exion waved her hand and said with a smile, "It's okay. I can take Atsu up the mountain. I can raise it." Lu Chen shook his head and said with a smile, "You really do like this stupid dog a lot, huh?" Exion showed a loving expression on her face. She touched Atsu's head and said with a smile, "We have gone through hardships together, right, Atsu?" Atsu barked, "Woof, woof, woof." While Exion was playing with Atsu in the small courtyard, Lu Chen and Old Ma walked to the side of the veranda and whispered to each other while watching. "You know what happened to the He brothers?" "Yes." Old Ma responded, then glanced at Exion who was playing with Atsu, especially at the light scar on her cheek, and then said lightly, "I didn't know this little girl was so cruel." Lu Chen said, "There's nothing a person won't do when they're cornered." Old Ma turned to look at him and said, "Did others force her, or did you force her?" Lu Chen said, "If I force her, do you think she will still follow me?" "That's true." Old Ma admitted this point, then said, "Now that He gang has been expelled from the sect, he didn't speak up for his only brother." Lu Chen said, "He has too many troubles." Many influential families in Kunwa City have a lot of hidden forces in the Kunlun party. Now everyone hates him. If he's smart, he'll hide from this storm and come out after at least a year of closed-door meditation. Old Ma smiled and nodded. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard Lu Qin say, "By the way, he gang should still be hiding in Kunwa City, but he's hidden under the arrangement of his big brother. Go find that guy's whereabouts and residence, then tell me." Old Ma was startled and said, "Do you have a grudge against he gang?" "No." Old Ma hesitated for a moment, then glanced at Exin on the other side and said softly, "Little Lu, don't tell me, you want to help her vent her anger?" Lu Chen's face was expressionless as he said, "No. I just feel that as long as this person doesn't die, he might be an idle person. Knowing a little bit of his whereabouts and movements might be useful in the future." Old Ma thought for a moment and said, "Okay, I'll handle this matter, but it may take some time to find him." "No hurry, take your time." Old Ma suddenly smiled and looked at Lu Chen, saying, "What value does that trash he gang have? Are you aiming at he?" Lu Chen sighed and said, "That damn Baldy is used to being a hands-off shopkeeper. He just told me to look for him, then ran to the immortal city thousands of miles away. In this huge Kunlun party with countless disciples, it's really like looking for a needle in a haystack. But finally, I thought of something." Old Ma's eyes lit up and he said, "What is it?" Lu Chen smiled faintly and said, "That devil cult spy wants to do such a big thing, so he must be planning something big. He must also be an extremely outstanding talent. Of course, such a person is also outstanding in the Kunlun sect. Therefore, the direction that I'm looking for may be those elite figures. He should also be considered a powerful figure." Chapter 99. When they returned to the mountain, in front of the mountain gate of the Kunlun party, as expected, the two people with the black dog were stopped. However, as a handyman disciple, Lu Qin couldn't say anything, while Exin just hugged Atsu tightly, and then silently looked at the few guarding disciples of the Kunlun party who stopped them. After a pleading look appeared on her face, the guarding disciples looked at each other, and then quickly let them go. The Kunlun party generally does not allow these cats and dogs to go up the mountain. Usually, those who do so will be stopped by the guarding disciples at the mountain gate. While walking on the mountain road of Kunlun, Exin said to Lu Chen with a little pride, "But I specifically checked the sect rules. This matter is too small, so small that our ancestors did not include this matter in the sect rules at all. And Kunlun mountain is so big. Although there are no monsters, there are all kinds of mountain cats and small beasts in the mountains at the edge. How can they really be banned?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "Smart." Exin stuck out her tongue and smiled. Then she leaned over and patted the head of Atsu, who was following her, and sighed, "In fact, those senior brothers know about me, and they feel sorry for me. This is also good. Being able to let Atsu go up the mountain with me, at least my suffering was not in vain." Lu Chen laughed. After walking for a while, the two were about to separate. Unexpectedly, at this time, Atsu habitually followed Lu Chen, which made Exin so angry that she hugged Atsu, the heartless black dog, and tried to persuade it to go with her. Who knew that the stupid dog Atsu was not grateful, and it was determined to follow Lu Chen. In the end, the helpless Exin could only wave goodbye to them with a sad face. Fortunately, now that they were living in the mountain of Kunlun, they could visit Atsu at any time. After Exin walked far away, Lu Chen walked back to his residence with Atsu. At the same time, he looked at Atsu, who was running back and forth excitedly because it came to a new place, and he was a little confused. Why did this lame black dog insist on following him? In the land of chaos, perhaps it could be explained by instinct, but after such a long time, including staying at Old Ma's place, this black dog was still so close to him. It seemed that something was not quite right. But after thinking about it, Lu Chen still could not figure out the reason, so in the end, he laughed at himself and thought that perhaps birds of a feather flocked together. The handyman disciples were the most numerous people in the huge population of the Kunlun party, but they had the lowest status. Lu Chen was one of the handyman disciples, so it was impossible for him to live on Rockpan Mountain like an official disciple like Yi Xian, let alone an elite disciple like He Yi who could have his own cave. The place where he lived was in a remote valley some distance away from Rockpan Valley. There were many terraced houses built here for the handyman disciples to live in. The house that belonged to Lu Chen was an inconspicuous one. It was not big, with a front door and a back window, gray walls and black tiles, and it looked a little depressing. After unlocking the door and pushing it open, Lu Chen habitually paused at the door for a moment, while Atsu, who was at his feet, curiously poked its head out from behind him and looked into the door. After a while, Lu Chen walked in and saw a simple table, chair, and a bed in the room. Other than that, there was almost no other furniture. Woof woof. Atsu barked twice, then jumped onto the bed. He lay there and grinned at Lu Chen, as if he couldn't stop smiling. Stupid dog. Lu Chen looked at Atsu with a look of disgust. He walked over and patted its butt, driving Atsu away, and said, "You are so dirty. Can't you let me sleep?" Woof woof. Atsu shook its head and wagged its tail, then sniffed here and there in the room. After a while, it ran to the door and lay on the ground. The next day, Xian came looking for Atsu. At the same time, she brought a lot of food that Atsu liked to eat. The black dog was so happy that it jumped up and down. Woof woof. After feeding Atsu, Xian asked Lu Chen what did Atsu eat yesterday. Lu Chen confidently said that there were so many forests around, and he drove Atsu into the forest to find its own food, and it would come back when it was full. Xian was stunned for a long time, and she almost cried while hugging Atsu. She hated that Atsu had no conscience. It only wagged its tail and was affectionate with Xian, but once Xian wanted to take it away, Atsu would resist. After trying a few times, Xian finally gave up helplessly. She secretly decided to come here a few more times in the future, and take good care of this poor little dog that had no parents. Lu Chen directly ignored Xian's kindness. Atsu, on the other hand, would desperately suck up to them when there was food, and ignore them when they were full. They had no moral integrity to speak of. Days passed by, and in the blink of an eye, it was time for the second batch of spirit herbs to be planted. Lu Chen continued to live between the house and the spirit field, but the difference was that he often had a black dog by his side, which was always happy and active. Of course, the disciples of the same sect were a little surprised that Lu Chen suddenly had a dog by his side, but it was not a big deal, so no one bothered. Atsu followed Lu Chen all day long. When Lu Chen was working in the spirit herb field, it would wander around the Stone Pan Valley. Sometimes, it would run into the forest, and sometimes, it would lie on the field and sleep. In this immortal sect that mortals yearn for, at least Atsu's life was very comfortable. After eating, it would sleep. After waking up, it would play. When it was tired, it would sleep and eat again. Even immortals could not compare to this happy life. After a period of time, one day at noon, Atsu left the Stone Pan Valley and ran into a forest at the edge of the Stone Pan Valley. During this period of time, it had been running around everywhere, and it had almost explored the surrounding terrain of the Stone Pan Valley. It had also left many urine traces in many places. The forest in front of them was located in the north of the Stone Pan Valley, and it was the last territory that it had not explored yet. Atsu stepped into the forest confidently, and as usual, patrolled the spiritual land and sniffed everywhere. The forest was very quiet. Occasionally, there was the sound of birds chirping, but no one knew where it came from in the dense branches. Sunlight shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, illuminating the flat path in the forest. Atsu sniffed the ground all the way. Sometimes it trotted, sometimes it walked slowly. Before it knew it, it had already walked a long distance. Suddenly, in a dark corner of the forest, a blurry shadow flashed past the dense foliage behind the trees. Atsu's ears suddenly pricked up, and it stopped suddenly. Then, it suddenly turned around and let out a low growl. Its eyes revealed a hint of fierceness. However, there was nothing behind it, only an empty forest. Atsu stared at the empty forest for a while, and gradually relaxed. There seemed to be some doubts in its eyes, but it still turned around and continued forward. After a few steps, a sound suddenly came from its side, as if someone had suddenly stepped on the forest ground and broken a dead branch. When the crack sound came, Atsu suddenly jumped up and bared its teeth in that direction, revealing its sharp fangs. In that direction, behind a thicket, there was a sudden movement of branches and leaves. Then, from behind the branches, a figure slowly appeared. An abnormally beautiful but somewhat cold little girl's face appeared behind the bushes. She looked at the black dog not far away with a strange look in her eyes. Chapter 100. In the depths of the forest, it was quiet. Separated by a clump of leaves, the black dog and the girl who suddenly appeared looked at each other. For some reason, Atsu looked a little nervous. It widened its eyes and stared unblinkingly at the girl behind the trees. Especially when it suddenly raised its head and sniffed the air a few times with its nose. Atsu suddenly took a step back, and the hair on its neck slowly stood up. It let out a low growl and showed its sharp fangs to the little girl. A dog. The little girl behind the trees also looked at Atsu. She seemed a little surprised and a little curious. After a while, the branches and leaves suddenly shook, and then she walked out from behind the trees. She was like a fairy that had fallen into the mortal world, elegant and pure. With every step she took, the green branches and leaves seemed to sway gently for her. Her right hand was behind her back, and her left hand was at her side. She gradually showed a trace of a smile, as if she was naive, and walked towards Atsu. Roar! The growl in Atsu's throat suddenly became louder, as if it was full of wariness and hostility towards this beautiful girl. Huh! The girl seemed a little surprised. She stopped walking, but the way she looked at Atsu seemed to be a little more interested. After looking at Atsu with her clear and bright eyes, she pondered for a while, and then seemed to think of something and smiled slightly. Come here. The girl squatted down 6 or 7 feet away from Atsu. She still maintained the strange posture of her right hand behind her back, and then raised her left hand. Her skin was as white as snow, and it looked as delicate and beautiful as a spring onion. She waved at Atsu and deliberately lowered her voice, as if she was whispering to it. There was a trace of inexplicable strangeness in her voice, and she said, "Little dog, come here." Atsu stood there motionlessly, his eyes fixed on the strangely beautiful little girl, as if he didn't hear her greeting. The atmosphere in the forest was silent and a little stiff, but the girl didn't seem to care. She narrowed her eyes slightly, but her gaze seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. She looked at Atsu and smiled. Then, she stretched out her white and tender fingers and said to Atsu, "Little dog, are you feeling very hungry? Do you feel like you can't eat your fill?" Atsu stared at her and made a muffled sound. He sounded angry and confused at the same time. The young girl smiled and squatted on the ground. Her voice seemed to gradually carry an indescribable allure. It was almost hard to imagine that this ghostly voice actually came from the mouth of a little girl who was only about 10 years old. "I can help you. Come here, I'll give you something to eat. A type of food that you truly desire but have never seen before." She smiled, looking as holy and beautiful as a fairy, but her pair of eyes seemed to be flashing a terrible and crazy flame from hell. Atsu hesitated, as if he couldn't make up his mind. But after a while, he seemed to be unable to resist the mysterious temptation. Finally, he took a step forward and slowly walked up to the little girl. It no longer bared its teeth, and the hair on its neck also calmed down. Occasionally, its tail would shake, but most of the time, Atsu still looked at the little girl with doubt and a little caution. A satisfied smile slowly appeared on the girl's face. She stretched out her hand and gently touched Atsu's forehead. Atsu made a subtle movement and then heard the girl's voice become deep and ethereal. She slowly took out her right hand from behind her back. "Eat, eat. I know what you desire most in your heart is actually this thing," she whispered to Atsu. Light shone through the gaps between the dense branches and leaves. Suddenly, there was a sudden silence in the depths of the forest. The wind stopped, and the trees were quiet. It was as if the whole world had stopped. A smear of dark red suddenly appeared, smearing this part of the world with a shocking trace of blood. Right in front of Atsu's eyes, was her right hand that had just appeared. Fresh blood dripped down, flowing crazily and wantonly, rolling along that delicate skin. It was a bloody hand dripping with blood that would make anyone tremble in fear. The strong smell of blood instantly surged through the depths of the forest like a tide. "Brother Lu." A clear call came from the ridge of the field. Lu Chen looked up and saw Exian standing there and waving at him with a smile. Lu Chen threw away the tools in his hand, clapped his hands to shake off the soil, and then walked over. He sat down on the edge of the field and said with a smile, "Why are you here?" Exian smiled and said, "I have nothing to do today, so I came over to have a look." Lu Chen curled his lips and sighed. There's such a big gap between people. I, an errand disciple, work myself half to death at the foot of the mountain all day and still don't earn much. You, on the other hand, earn a lot of money every few days. It's just that the divine disc in your stomach has a few more pillars than mine. Exian was originally squatting beside him. Hearing this, her cheeks turned red. She hit Lu Chen and said, "You're talking nonsense again." Lu Chen laughed. Exian looked around and asked, "Hey, where's Atsu? Doesn't it usually follow you here?" Lu Chen also looked around. Although he didn't see Atsu, he calmly said to Exian, "That stupid dog can't stay still. It likes to run around, and it likes to hide in the forest. It probably ran into some forest again." "I see." Exian looked a little disappointed, but soon a trace of worry appeared on her face. She said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, Atsu just came here not long ago. This place is big, and there are forests and ravines everywhere. Will Atsu get lost?" Lu Chen waved his hand indifferently and said, "It's okay, you don't have to worry." Exian looked at Lu Chen helplessly. She didn't know why this brother Lu was so confident. Anyway, if it was her, she wouldn't be able to do it. But now that they couldn't find Atsu, she had no choice but to suppress the trace of worry in her heart and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, have you thought about what you want me to do?" Lu Chen looked at the mountains in the distance. Without turning his head, he casually replied, "What is it?" Exian said, "Didn't you say last time that if you help me come up with an idea, I will promise to do one thing for you?" "Oh, that thing." Lu Chen seemed to have come to a realization. He turned to look at Exian with a relaxed expression and said with a smile, "Why, are you in a hurry?" Exian shook her head and said, "Of course I'm not in a hurry. But that thing, you really helped me a lot. I want to repay Brother Lu." Lu Chen said, "I haven't thought about it yet. Let's talk about it when I think about it." "Okay then." Exian seemed to feel a little sore in her legs after squatting for a long time. She directly landed on the ridge of the field beside Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at her and said, "Aren't you afraid of the soil?" Exian pursed her lips and said, "I'm not afraid. Back in the disorienting lands, I even rolled in the soil and water. Especially those insects, drugs, it's much dirtier than here." Lu Chen laughed. Exian glared at him and waited until he stopped laughing. She said to Lu Chen, "But I recently heard that Bai Chao Tang will be recruiting some people to do spiritual power cultivation. If they do well, they may not only get some opportunities, but they may also be able to leave this spiritual field at the foot of the mountain. I wonder if you're interested." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and looked at Exian with a trace of surprise. "You actually knew about this in advance?" Exian looked around. Seeing that there was no one nearby, she smiled slightly proudly and said to Lu Chen in a low voice, "Although our family has been average these years, there are always some brothers and uncles who have joined the Kunlun party. One of them is in Bai Chao Tang and has become a follower of immortal Qian Dang. So, are you interested?" Exin giggled as she looked at Lu Chen, and said, those who do things like cultivating spiritual energy are either seniors, elders, or young and powerful geniuses in our sect. If they are fated, they will have great fortune in the future. Lu Chen looked at her for a moment and suddenly laughed. He nodded and said, yes, of course I'm interested. That promise. He pointed at Exin and nodded. Help me with this. Okay. Exin nodded with a smile. Deep in the woods. The bloody hand flitted across Atu's eyes slowly. The scarlet and terrifying color of blood was like a sharp knife, causing its pupils to contract uncontrollably. The extraordinarily beautiful girl was gently stroking the fur of Atsu's back with her delicate, snow-white left hand. Her right hand was dripping with blood, filling the air with a strong pungent smell of blood. This strange scene was concentrated on her, making her look like a holy fairy, but also like a ferocious evil spirit. Eat. Her deep and melodious voice reverberated through the forest. You have the bloodline of the heavenly wolf. You were born to be different. How can ordinary food satisfy your appetite? Only blood, blood that contains spiritual power, is what you desire the most. Come eat. She slowly put her hand to the mouth of Atsu, with a strange smile on her face. She seemed to be looking forward to it, but also sympathizing with it. Perhaps there was also a little desire. Come taste this blood. As long as you have tasted it, one day, the blood in your body will awaken. Atsu's breathing slowly became louder. Its eyes seemed to be struggling in pain. It wanted to leave several times, but every time its eyes fell on the bloody hand again. After a while, Atsu's head slowly moved closer. It stuck out its tongue and gently licked the petite but demon-like bloody hand. The blood dispersed and melted into its mouth. The light in the woods quietly dimmed. Unknowingly, it was already dusk. Chapter 101. At dusk, when the sky was about to turn dark, the sunset glow was still hanging in the western sky, like a burning flame, radiating an unusually beautiful and brilliant afterglow. Stone Pan Valley was already a little dark, and most of the Oddjob disciples had already left. Lu Chen and Exin were still sitting on the edge of the field, looking at the deserted surroundings, but only the two of them were left. A long time had passed, and the sky was about to turn dark, but Atsu still hadn't come back. Exin was a little anxious, constantly looking around, and at the same time, glancing at Lu Chen from time to time. Lu Chen also frowned slightly, looking a little surprised. They waited like this for a while, watching the sky get darker and darker, and the last ray of the sun was about to disappear. The vast Stone Pan Valley was about to be shrouded in darkness. Exin finally couldn't help but stand up, and said to Lu Chen, Brother Lu, let's go find Atsu. Lu Chen frowned, this valley is too big, and we don't know where that stupid dog went. Plus, it's dark, we can't find it. Suddenly, Exin's eyes lit up, and she said, could it be that Atsu ran back home by itself? Lu Chen thought for a moment, and said, it shouldn't be, these days, it has been with me every day, and has never slipped away by itself. Oh, what should we do? Exin was anxious, and it seemed that she was really worried. Just as she was panicking, she suddenly heard Lu Chen, who was next to her, say, look over there. Exin looked in the direction that Lu Chen was pointing, and saw that on the other side of the field, on a path that had become very dark, suddenly a black shadow suddenly appeared, slowly walking out of the darkness, and then approached them. The black shadow was not tall. When it got closer, it really looked like Atu. But the strange thing was, Atu, who was usually lively and energetic, even though he was lame but still loved to run, was walking abnormally slowly at this time. Step by step, it stepped on the field embankment, and the darkness silently surged around it, as if it had become one with its black fur. Only its pair of eyes faintly glowed in the dark valley, and it seemed a little different from usual. Atsu! Exin shouted with joy, and her previous worry suddenly disappeared. She walked towards the black dog with a smile, and at the same time, she opened her arms, and said with a smile, Stinky Atsu, I have been waiting for you for a long time today. Where did you go to play? Atsu's footsteps slightly paused, and it slowly raised its head. When it saw Exin running towards it, it immediately stopped. Behind Exin, Lu Chen looked at Atsu's eyes, and then followed without saying a word. Ha! In the blink of an eye, Exin had already run to Atsu's side, squatted down, and first touched Atsu's head with her hand. Then, as usual, she touched the fur on Atsu's back with one hand, and held Atsu's head with the other, and played with it affectionately. Her white skin looked particularly beautiful and conspicuous in the night. Her slender neck and cheeks were right in front of Atsu's eyes, and from time to time, she even leaned on it, accompanied by her cheerful and crisp voice. It seemed so warm. Atsu's pair of eyes stared closely at Exin's neck, which was very close to it. Its mouth slightly opened and closed, as if it was panting. Gradually, it opened its mouth again, like a thirsty traveler seeing clear and sweet spring water in front of it. Its snow-white sharp fangs were shining at the edge of its mouth, giving off a sense of coldness. Its head faintly shrank back, and then slowly stretched forward, as if responding to Exin's joyful hug, and slowly approached the girl's white neck. Sharp fangs and blood vessels that seemed like they could be broken with a single blow were very close. Suddenly, a hand suddenly stretched out from the dark shadow, passed through Exin's shoulder, and pressed down, covering the black dog's eyes. That pair of deep and serene eyes suddenly disappeared in the darkness of the night. Atsu's body suddenly shook, and its body trembled. The hair on its neck suddenly stood up, but it instantly calmed down. Everything happened so fast that it was almost invisible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, it quieted down again, standing still in the same place, letting Lu Chen's palm cover its eyes. "You stupid dog, where did you run off to?" Lu Chen laughed and scolded Atsu. His palm was still covering Atsu's eyes, and his body was also squatting beside Atsu, looking like he was covering Atsu's head. Then he turned his head and said to Exin with a smile, "But we are finally back. It's getting late, and there will be curfew later. It seems that we won't be able to play today, let's go back." Exin hesitated for a moment, and then said with a smile, "Okay." As she said that, she touched Atsu's soft fur again, and said with a smile, "Atsu, listen to Brother Lu, I will come to play with you tomorrow, okay? But you can't just run out and come back so late again." Atsu stood still, its eyes were still covered by Lu Chen's hand, and it remained silent. However, its mouth slightly opened and closed, and a dark light flashed past its sharp white fangs. "Don't worry, I will find a rope to tie it to a tree later, and see if it can still run away." "Ah, then don't. Atsu is so pitiful," Exin immediately protested. Lu Chen smiled and nodded, and said, "Up to you, I won't tie it up if you say so." "Hey!" Exin suddenly became happy. She nodded and smiled at Lu Chen, then patted Atsu's head again, and turned to walk away. After a few steps, she suddenly seemed to think of something, and looked back. She saw that on the ridge of the field, Lu Chen was still gently pressing Atsu's eyes. A man and a dog were side by side, and their posture seemed a little strange. "Brother Lu, why do you always cover Atsu's eyes?" Exin asked loudly. "Oh, this stupid dog is not obedient, I have to teach it a lesson." "I will bring it back later," Lu Chen replied with a smile. Exin replied with an "oh," turned around and continued to walk, and soon disappeared into the night. When the last remnant of the girl also disappeared, only Lu Chen and Atsu were left in the entire valley. At this time, the sky was completely dark, and darkness spread from all directions, completely swallowing their figures. In the darkness, Atsu was still standing quietly, as if it was waiting for something. After a while, it suddenly felt that its eyes were loosened, and then the palm that was covering its eyes slowly moved away. The face of the man in the darkness appeared in front of it, like a shadow in the dark night, blurry and indistinct. There was only a pair of bright but stern eyes, staring coldly into Atsu's eyes. Between heaven and earth, suddenly, there was a cold wind blowing. It was bone-chilling, as if it could freeze and solidify blood. Atsu took a step back, then slowly, gently lowered its body to the ground, like an obedient subject, bowing its head in front of a powerful king. In its mouth, there was a low whimpering sound. Lu Chen stared at Atsu for a while, suddenly stood up, turned around, and walked away. At the same time, he said lightly, "It's late, let's go back." In a secluded valley, in a simple and deserted hut, Lu Chen lit a candle. The door was closed, and the window was tightly shut, so this lonely hut seemed to be isolated from the outside world, becoming a small world. Atsu was lying at Lu Chen's feet, looking a little sleepy and tired, but it didn't fall asleep. It put its head close to Lu Chen's ankle, slightly rubbing against it. Its long black tail would shake from time to time, but it was still unusually quiet. Lu Chen sat alone in silence for a long time, frowning slightly, as if he was thinking about something. After a long time, he suddenly bent down and sat directly on the ground. At the same time, he reached out and picked up Atsu, and put it on his feet. An inexplicable aura seemed to be faintly exuding from his body. Atsu twisted its body uneasily, but after glancing at the expressionless Lu Chen, it quickly calmed down and quietly lay in his arms. Lu Chen's eyes swept over Atsu's body, staying for a long time on its eyes, then suddenly reached out and opened Atsu's mouth. Snow-white sharp fangs were exposed in front of him, mixed with a faint, almost imperceptible smell of blood. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. He loosened his fingers, then pressed his palm on the fur of Atsu's body, and slowly touched down. Under the fur, the black dog's muscles bulged a little, wrapped around its bones, giving it a strange sense of power. When his hand slid across Atsu's chest, Lu Chen suddenly stopped. Through the muscles and fur, in the chest, there was a heart beating strongly. Strong, fast, and violent, beating far better than ordinary beasts, and far better than his usual self. There was a trace of haze in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes, but there was not much change in his expression. After feeling the strange heartbeat of Atsu for a while, his palm slid down again, touching the back of Atsu's back. Suddenly, there was a little moisture in his hand. Lu Chen looked down slightly, and saw a dark shadow between Atsu's black fur. It seemed to be the remnants of blood that had flowed through, emitting a subtle smell between the dry and bloody smell. Then, not far away, there was another similar small bloodstain. Lu Chen touched it bit by bit, and pieces of remnant traces gradually appeared on Atsu's fur. Some of them were attached to the surface, and some had penetrated deep into the skin. Then, they converged together, and finally formed a shape. Lu Chen's expression turned cold for the first time, and his gaze was as cold as a knife. He looked at the thing that was formed by traces of blood on the back of the black dog in front of him. It was a handprint. A handprint formed by blood. He suddenly covered it with his palm, and then found that the handprint seemed to be only half the size of his palm, as if it was a child's palm, stained with blood, and left this bloody handprint on Atsu's body. The night was getting darker, and suddenly, a cold wind blew by, abruptly knocking open the window of the house. The cold wind rushed in, and abruptly blew out the candle flame. The whole world suddenly turned dark. Chapter 102. In the dark, Lu Chen sat still, but Atsu suddenly stood up from the ground, stared at the window, and let out an angry roar. The cold wind blew past, and it was cold inside and outside the house. Inside the house, one couldn't even see their own fingers, and outside the house, there was a boundless black sea. Lu Chen lowered his head and saw a pair of green eyes right beside him in the darkness. They flickered with a strange luster, as if they were transparent and precious gems. At the same time, they also seemed to emit a cold and gloomy light. It was as if an evil spirit was silently staring at him. As if feeling his gaze, Atsu also withdrew its gaze and looked up at Lu Chen. The eyes of a man and a dog met in the air. After a while, Lu Chen reached out and gently touched Atsu's head, and whispered, "It's okay." Atsu quieted down. Lu Chen stood up and walked to the window, looked outside, and then closed the window again without any expression. With a "pa" sound, the outside world was once again separated from here. The next day, the sun rose as usual, and the people in the mountains of Kunlun went about their own business as usual. Everyone lived according to their own path. As the lowest-rung disciples of the Kunlun party, they had their own lives, and that was to work hard every day to pursue the hope of becoming immortals in the future. Even if the hope was very slim, everyone in the world worked hard for that hope. The legendary stories of the lowest-rung disciples turning the tide and finally becoming saints and immortals were still passed down in the world today. After thousands of years, they still hadn't disappeared. Instead, they became more and more magnificent, inspiring generation after generation of Rung disciples to dedicate their lives to this. When the sun shone on Shirpan Valley, Lu Chen also arrived with Atsu. There was no lack of people who came earlier than him, so at this moment, there were already figures working in the large spiritual fields. As for Exian, who vowed to come and play with them again yesterday, she was still nowhere to be seen. Maybe she was still sleeping in her warm bed. Compared with last night's abnormality, Atsu seemed to have completely recovered after a night's sleep. Following closely behind Lu Chen, it limped around, sniffed, and looked no different from usual. Lu Chen also acted as if nothing had happened last night. He calmly did his own things. After arriving at the spiritual field, he went down to the field and didn't pay much attention to Atsu. Of course, he didn't find a rope to tie Atsu to a tree like what he told Exian yesterday. In the beginning, Atsu was still playing around Lu Chen's spiritual field. However, after playing for a while, it became a little bored. After looking around for a while, it barked at Lu Chen twice. Lu Chen didn't look back, as if he didn't hear it. Atsu hesitated for a while, then ran away by itself. Nowadays, Atsu was very familiar with the Shirpan Valley. The crisscrossed ridges of the fields were no problem for it. Soon, it ran out of the spiritual field and came to the edge of the forest. However, as it walked, the forest appeared in front of it again. It stood silently in front of the black dog. Atsu was obviously a little hesitant. After hesitating for a while, it lay down on the ground and stood up again. After walking a few rounds, it finally slowly walked into the forest. This forest was very cold. The deeper it went, the quieter it became. Gradually, it seemed that even the sound of birds could not be heard. The forest should be full of vitality, but for some reason, it gave people a sense of coldness and desolation. Atsu walked slowly, his pair of dog eyes looking around vigilantly, as if he was very careful. After walking for a while, it suddenly stopped and looked around. It found that this was the place where it met the mysterious little girl yesterday. Woof, woof woof, Atsu barked twice. A gentle breeze blew through the forest, and the green leaves swayed gently, but no one responded. Atsu waited for a while. It seemed to be a little confused, but it also seemed to be relieved. It turned around and was ready to leave. However, at this moment, a low laugh suddenly came from the depths of the forest. The voice was clear and melodious, like a wind chime gently swaying in the breeze. The person was not there, but it was already a beautiful picture. After a moment, the voice was soft, drifting with the wind, "Puppy, come." Atsu widened its eyes and looked at the dense trees in the depths of the forest. After a moment of hesitation, it still walked over. A few fresh green leaves that had yet to wither strangely fell from the tree overhead. The leaves swayed slightly, and a moment later, a beautiful and immature face of a little girl appeared from behind the leaves. She looked at Atsu with interest and giggled. Her eyes flashed with a strange light, like the eyes of a snake, beautiful and dangerous. Or, because of the danger, there was a strange beauty. Atsu suddenly stopped and raised its nose to sniff the air. There was the smell of blood. It was much stronger than yesterday. "You smell it?" The little girl looked at Atsu and smiled. Then she stretched out her white and tender left hand and waved at it. "Come here, I'll show you something." Atsu hesitated for a moment and stared at the little girl. For some reason, it did not continue to move forward. The girl seemed a little surprised. After thinking for a while, the smile on her lips seemed to be a little wider. She did not say anything more and just slowly pushed the branches and leaves in front of her. A blood-red light flashed in front of it in an instant, and the smell of blood in the air became thicker. "Come here, don't you like the smell of blood the most?" The beautiful girl's soft voice seemed to be inexplicably tempting. "Don't be afraid, you were born to drink blood. Come here, come here." Atsu's body began to tremble slowly, and its eyes flickered with a strange light. But at this moment, suddenly, on the other side of the forest, someone suddenly snorted. Suddenly, a black shadow flashed, like a ghost, and swept into the back of the forest in a blink of an eye. It was Lu Qin. A cry of surprise suddenly came from the back of the forest. Atsu was also stunned on the spot, as if it was dumbfounded for a moment. And in this short span of a few breaths, there was a series of muffled sounds. No one knew what was happening behind the thicket, but after a while, there was a sudden roar, and a large tree was directly snapped in half. The entire thicket came crashing down. The incomparably strong smell of blood instantly hit them in the face, and the dark red color soared into the air. On the ground behind the forest, there was an unrecognizable beast lying on the ground. At this moment, it was already dead. What was unbearable to look at was that the corpse was covered with cuts and bruises. No one knew how many wounds it had been cut, and blood flowed everywhere. Two figures turned over from behind the forest and entangled with each other. They suddenly started fighting fiercely. It was Lu Qin and the little girl who seemed to be just over 10 years old. What made one speechless was that in this small space, both of their moves were exceptionally vicious. Strangling the throat, gouging the eyes, hammering the chest and hitting the groin. Every move and every style were aimed at the vital parts of the body. But one by one they were neutralized by the opponent, and then they would be greeted with even tougher and more terrifying killing moves. This kind of fighting style completely lacked the elegance and nobility of a normal cultivator displaying their supernatural powers. There was not even the slightest bit of the legendary celestial bearing. How was this the Kunlun Mountains of a famous cultivation sect? This was clearly the most despicable and vicious killer in the mortal world. The most shocking thing was that the little girl was obviously very young, but she was so ferocious that it made people's hair stand on end. She was even no weaker than Lu Qin. But in the end, Lu Qin seemed to have the upper hand. It was not because of his viciousness and profound skills. But in this strange yet exceptionally dangerous close combat, the little girl's strength after sustaining for a while, finally weakened. The beast's blood stained their bodies, and even the girl's beautiful face was stained with blood, making her look even more ferocious and ferocious. She panted fiercely, both her hands were grabbed by Lu Qin. Suddenly she screamed and directly used her teeth to bite Lu Qin's throat. This time Lu Qin was caught unprepared. He groaned in pain and felt a burst of pain coming from his neck. With a roar, he suddenly lifted his leg and heavily kicked that girl's abdomen. The girl cried out involuntarily. Her entire body was sent flying by the impact, but she floated in the wind for a while. She trembled at first, but she quickly restrained herself. Like a feather, she landed directly on a tree trunk, and then silently slid down. Like a ferocious cub. Her face was stained with blood, her eyes filled with murderous intent. Panting heavily, she coldly looked at Lu Qin. Lu Qin reached out and touched his neck. His hand was wet. When he put it in front of his eyes, half of his palm was covered in blood. He raised his head and glanced at the girl not far away. Then, without changing his expression, he tore off a piece of his robe, wrapped it around his neck, and tied a knot. "You're even fiercer than a dog," Lu Qin said. The girl narrowed her eyes slightly, and a dangerous light flashed in the depths of her eyes. Suddenly, her body shot out like a spring, but she did not pounce on Lu Qin. Instead, she strangely rushed towards the black dog standing on the side. The sound of the wind was fierce, and the momentum was like a knife, as if it would tear Atsu apart in the next moment. This caused the black dog's body to curl up and retreat in fear. At this moment, Lu Qin's figure suddenly cut in from the side. In an instant, he knocked away the terrifying girl in midair. At the same time, he shouted, "Run, Atsu!" Atsu was still in a state of shock. It subconsciously tucked its tail between its legs, turned around, and fled. In the blink of an eye, it had run far away and disappeared into the forest. However, perhaps because it was too panicked, the stupid dog ran in the wrong direction. Instead of running out of the forest, it rushed deeper into the forest. The figures in the air separated and landed on the ground. Both of them groaned in pain at the same time. Blood flowed from Lu Chen's neck again. The piece of cloth that had just been tied around his neck had disappeared, revealing the terrible wound. At the same time, there were 3 shocking claw marks. He had been attacked by the girl just now. After the girl landed on the ground, she staggered 3 steps back. Her beautiful eyebrows were tightly knitted together, and she sucked in a breath of cold air. She clutched her lower abdomen tightly with her hands. Between the gaps of her white, jade-like fingers, dark red blood slowly seeped out. Among the bloodstains under her clothes, there was a vague, bloody wound. It was a sword wound. It was a wound that had been ruthlessly stabbed by a sword. It was a merciless, murderous wound. In the midst of the blood, her face became pale. Chapter 103. She raised her head to look at Lu Chen, and finally her eyes fell on Lu Chen's hand. There seemed to be an afterimage of a black dagger passing by, and then quickly disappearing, as if it had always been empty. The girl's cheeks became increasingly pale, and more blood flowed out of her lower abdomen, dyeing her fingers red. Only her eyes were still sharp and fierce, with a trace of coldness, coldly looking at Lu Chen. After a moment, she suddenly opened her mouth and said, "I'm only 10 years old, and you actually dare to do this to me?" Lu Chen's expression did not change in the slightest, and said, "I just don't want to die." "Bah!" The girl sneered, "You're a man, yet you still have so many excuses to bully me. Do you really not feel embarrassed?" Lu Chen did not answer her, and after looking at her thoughtfully for a moment, he suddenly walked towards the girl. The girl suddenly seemed a little nervous, and her body shrank back a little, and suddenly shouted, "You can't kill me." Lu Chen stood in front of her, and looked at the girl whose height did not even reach his chest. For a moment, he also felt that it was unreal. No one would have thought that this girl, who was as beautiful as a fairy, would actually have such a dangerous and cruel side. The scene of seeing her at the Kunlun mountain gate that day flashed in his mind. Lu Chen's heart moved, and he frowned. "Why? I have a great background, if you dare to touch me, you're dead." The girl fiercely threatened him. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows, as if he was a little interested, and said, "Oh, so powerful? Tell me." The girl seemed to hesitate for a moment, but glanced at Lu Chen's eyes that seemed to vaguely become a little cold, and hurriedly said, "I'm about to become Hakushin Jinkuin's 3rd pro-disciple." Huh? This time, Lu Chen was really shocked, and he couldn't help but size up the girl again. What kind of person was Hakushin Jinkuin? In the Kunlun party, he was a peerless master who stood side by side with Lord Tianlan. Even the current leader of the Kunlun party, Immortal Idol Month, was only his eldest disciple. Everyone knew that Hakushin Jinkuin only had 2 disciples. One was Jinren Idol Month, and the other was Jin Dan Friar Zhuxian. In the past 60 years, no one in the Kunlun party had ever heard of Hakushin Jinkuin having the thought of accepting a disciple. That was a perfected cultivator of the soul formation level, the most powerful figure in the cultivation world of the Divine Land. A 10-year-old girl actually dared to say that she wanted to become a disciple of a true monarch. Lu Chen's first reaction was that the girl was lying. But soon, he suddenly remembered a piece of news that old Ma had told him in private in Kunwu City that day. He frowned and took a step forward, almost within reach of her. He stared into the girl's eyes and said, "Could it be that you're the legendary genius of the 5 pillars that only appears once in 1,000 years?" The girl was startled. She seemed a little surprised, but then she said with a bit of arrogance, "Yes, it's me. Now you know that I didn't lie to you." Before she finished speaking, Lu Chen suddenly raised his hand and struck the back of the girl's head. Immediately, the girl's beautiful face turned pale. She let out a low groan and her body fell forward. Halfway through, she closed her eyes and fainted. Lu Chen reached out and hugged her. His brows were tightly knitted as he mumbled, "What the hell, why am I so unlucky?" The black dog ran madly through the forest in a panic. Before he knew it, he had run far away. When he came back to his senses, he found that he was already on top of another mountain. This place was probably no longer within the boundaries of Stone Pan Valley. This mountain was also a bit different from the others. There were basically no tall trees on the mountain. Instead, most of the places were covered with verdant grass. In particular, the gentle slope at the foot of the mountain was covered with a large meadow. The mountain breeze blew and the grass rose and fell like waves. It was like a soft green carpet of grass. Anyone who saw it couldn't help but want to roll around on it. Atsu stood blankly at the foot of the mountain for a while. Then, it suddenly looked back and let out two soft barks. It seemed to be a bit hesitant, but in the end, it still turned around and walked back the way it came. Although the direction it went in seemed to be very dangerous, for it, there seemed to be something more important. It quietly overcame the fear in its heart and made it go back. But at this time, Atsu suddenly heard a mooing sound coming from the distance. To be exact, it came from the depths of the large meadow. It sounded a bit familiar. Atsu was stunned for a moment. It turned around and saw a huge figure lazily turning over in the thick grass. It raised a huge bull's head and glanced at Atsu. It was a huge oxen with two strange horns. "It's a small world, and we meet again after parting in the desolate valley." Atsu's eyeballs rolled around. Then, it barked at the oxen in the distance and ran over. Atsu ran to the meadow. When it got closer, it could feel the huge size of this oxen. It looked like a small mountain. At that moment, the green ox seemed to be basking in the sun. He had nothing to do and watched curiously as the black puppy ran all the way to him and started barking at him. Woof, woof woof, woof 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 woof, Atsu's tail kept wagging. It seemed to be very respectful and deliberately trying to please this green bull. Then, it seemed to be pleading. However, oxen had no reaction to this. After looking at Atsu for a moment, it lost interest and let out a mooing sound. Then, it closed its eyes again and seemed to be going back to sleep. Atsu became a little anxious, but it didn't dare to be disrespectful to this huge mythological beast. It anxiously paced around on the spot. Right at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared from behind oxen. It was the figure of a woman. She was tall and slender, and she was extremely beautiful. There was a beautiful scarlet feather shawl draped over her shoulders, and it was as if a beautiful fiery cloud had landed on her delicate shoulders. This woman was standing very close to Oxen, and one of her hands was even pressed against Oxen's body. However, Oxen didn't seem to be repulsed by this. It seemed to be treating this woman with special respect. After the woman walked out, there was no expression on her face. Little Ching doesn't like to meddle in other people's business. Don't bother it. Atsu stood rooted to the spot for a long time. It looked at the lazy oxen, then looked at the strange woman, as if it couldn't figure out the relationship between the two. However, it quickly remembered something more important. There was no help here, but there was someone more important to it in the forest at the foot of the mountain. Atsu let out a roar, and it seemed to be a little angry. It barked at the man and the cow before turning around and rushing down the mountain. Oxen didn't move in the slightest. Its eyes were closed, and it seemed that it was about to fall asleep. In contrast, the young woman standing beside Oxen suddenly furrowed her brows. She looked at the little black dog that was running for its life, and said, "There seems to be something wrong with this dog." Moo. Oxen's huge head turned around, and it rubbed the grass on the ground a few times. It yawned, and it still seemed to be disinterested. The young woman kept looking at the back of Atsu in the distance. After thinking for a moment, she said in a low voice, "There's a smell of blood." The grayish-white wall appeared in front of her, and it trembled. When she had just woken up, this was the feeling in front of her. After a while, the young woman regained consciousness. She turned her head with some difficulty, and then she saw the face of Lu Qin sitting by the bed. "You're awake." Lu Qin smiled at her, and nodded with a very gentle expression. The young woman was startled, and she let out a low groan, as if she was startled. She suddenly sat up, and wanted to hit him with a backhand. However, her body had only flipped for a moment, and she suddenly fell back down, falling onto the bed. Fortunately, her body was covered with soft bedding, and it didn't hurt much. The young woman gasped for breath, and then found that her hands and feet were tied, and she couldn't move. However, the bleeding wound on her lower abdomen had been bandaged, and there was a faint pain, and there was a burst of cool feeling on the wound. It seemed that some kind of medicine had been applied, and it felt pretty good. The young woman looked up at Lu Qin, and after staring at him for a moment, she said, "What do you mean?" Lu Qin sighed, and looked a little helpless, and said, "I've been thinking about how to deal with you." The young woman sneered, and said, "What do you want?" Lu Qin stretched out 2 fingers, and said, "There are 2 ways. First, I'll treat your injury, and when your injury is healed, we'll pretend that this never happened. Second, I'll just kill you." When the young woman heard the first way, her face was full of contempt, and her face was full of disdain, but when she heard the second way, she was shocked, and said angrily, "How dare you? You dare to kill me?" Lu Qin said seriously, "I have no other way." The young woman became even angrier, and said angrily, "What do you mean by no other way? Why do you have to kill me? I didn't provoke you. Don't tell me it's because I wanted to steal a few seed of asparagus from you in that broken shop a few days ago? I say, you look quite good, but how can you be so vicious?" Lu Qin said, "What you scolded me with just now, except for one thing, is wrong. I'm not that kind of person." The young woman stared at him, and after a moment, she sneered, "You just said that you want to kill me. But tell me, what did I say just now?" Lu Qin coughed, and said, "That shop is indeed a broken shop. There's no other way, the shop owner is stupid. As for the rest, I won't admit it. TCH. The young woman snorted, looking like she obviously didn't believe him, but after these words, the atmosphere between the two eased up a bit. After a while, the young woman thought for a moment, and said, "I've already told you my identity. If you're not afraid of angering true monarch, then go ahead and harm me." Lu Qin said, "I don't want to harm you." The young woman raised her hand, looked at the rope, and sneered, "Then why are you tying me up?" Lu Qin was silent for a moment, and stared at her eyes, and said, "I don't want to provoke Hakushin Jinkuan, so I can let you go. But you have to tell me, at such a young age, where did you learn these killing skills?" Chapter 104. I don't have the ability to kill people. The little girl flatly denied and sneered, "Go out and ask around. I'm a girl who grew up in Kunwa cities by clan. I'm pure, upright, dignified, gentle, and lovable. It would be strange if anyone would believe your words." Lu Qin was silent for a moment, then said, "You're more powerful than I thought." After a pause, he said, "By clan's member. White Lotus." The girl glanced at him and asked, "What about you?" Lu Qin. White Lotus, who was born with a devastatingly beautiful face at such a young age, sized up Lu Qin with her bright eyes, then looked around the room and said, "You're still a part-time disciple." Lu Qin smiled and said, "My aptitude isn't good. I've made a fool of myself." Humph. White Lotus seemed to be a bit young after all. After hearing this compliment, a complacent expression appeared on her face. But very soon, her face suddenly darkened, and she spat and said, "Pa! You can still catch me with your aptitude? You're beating around the bush to scold me." Lu Qin smiled and shook his head, not saying anything. White Lotus rolled her eyes and suddenly looked at him with interest. She said, "Speaking of which, how can a part-time disciple have such messy abilities? What's your background?" Lu Qin said, "I used to kill pigs. I've seen blood and fought before. Later, I felt that killing pigs was boring, so I wanted to become an immortal and gain the Tao. That's why I went through untold hardships to come to the Kunlun party. Butcher. The smile on White Lotus's face suddenly froze. As Lu Qin spoke, although he looked relaxed on the surface, his mind was spinning rapidly. This girl, White Lotus, was obviously a huge trouble. If he didn't handle it carefully, it could bring about endless troubles in the future. Thinking of this, even he, who was always calm, couldn't help but complain in his heart. He thought to himself, nowadays, even a 10-year-old girl is so scary. What will happen when she grows up? At this moment, the two of them suddenly heard a rustling sound coming from the door. White Lotus's eyes lit up, but Lu Qin stood up calmly and walked to the door to open it. A black shadow darted in with a swoosh. It was Black Dog. As soon as it came in, it intimately rubbed against Lu Chen's side and wagged its tail with all its might, looking like it was flattering Lu Chen. Lu Chen closed the door and scolded with a smile, "Don't pretend to be stupid. I still remember how you abandoned me and ran away by yourself." Atsu suddenly let out a low whimper, looking a little sad. But at this moment, a sneer suddenly came from the other side of the bed. It was White Lotus who was lying there and sneered, "Who's pretending? I clearly remember that you told this black dog to run away first, and now you're blaming the dog. Can't you have a conscience when you speak, uncle?" "Uncle." Lu Chen's face darkened, but before he could retort, Atu had already turned around to look at the young girl lying on the bed. He immediately let out an angry roar as the hair on his neck stood on end. He bared his teeth and roared fiercely at Bai Lian. It looked like he was about to rush up and bite her if he didn't agree with him. "Uncle." Lu Chen's expression darkened. White Lotus, however, was not afraid at all. She looked at Atsu and sneered, "Stupid dog, if you bark at me again, I'll skin you." Atsu was getting more and more annoyed, but it seemed that it was really a little afraid of White Lotus. It barked repeatedly, but it stayed at the feet of Lu Chen and did not rush forward even half a step. Lu Chen kicked Atsu's butt and scolded, "Idiot, she's tied up by me." "What are you afraid of?" Atsu stared at White Lotus. Sure enough, it saw that White Lotus was lying on the bed with her hands and feet tied up. It suddenly became excited and rushed over with a loud bark. It rushed in front of White Lotus like a wolf or a tiger, opened its big mouth and bit randomly in the air, threatening her. White Lotus was so angry that her little face turned pale. She blocked a few times with her hands and then said angrily, "Stupid dog, you're really as heartless as your master. Did you forget that I gave you your favorite thing?" Atu whimpered a couple of times. It looked like it couldn't understand human language anymore, but it still managed to sneak a peek at Lu Chen from the corner of its eyes as it bared its fangs. Lu Chen walked over and said with a slight frown, "By the way, this is also something I want to ask you. How do you know about blood food?" White Lotus' face suddenly changed, but then she snorted and turned her head away. She had a look of, "I don't understand what you're talking about, and I'm too lazy to say more." Lu Chen's face darkened and said indifferently, "Blood food is a secret method passed down from generation to generation in the southern barbarians. Only the great shamans and priests can practice this method, and it has never been passed down in the Central Plains. Do you know that once I report this matter, you may be directly burned to death in front of this Kunlun mountain, not to mention becoming a disciple of a true monarch?" White Lotus' face changed several times in a row. She turned her head to look at Lu Chen, and her eyes became cold. She said, "You're just a butcher, how do you know so much? How many secrets do you have in secret? I don't think I need to tell you." A janitor disciple with ruthless means, astonishing strength, and knowing so many secrets. If I were to say, you might even be a spy of the evil sect. If we really shed all pretense of cordiality, do you believe that you won't be able to live? Lu Chen lowered his head slightly. After a moment, he shook his head and said slowly, "I'm not a spy of the evil sect." "Who would believe that?" White Lotus sneered and said. She stared at Lu Chen, her eyes as cold as a snake. There was a short silence in the room. For a moment, no one spoke. But both sides were still staring at each other, no one was willing to step back. The atmosphere became somewhat tense. Atsu was still fiercely baring its fangs at the side. But after baring its fangs for a long time and almost dripped its saliva onto the bed, Atsu suddenly realized that the other two people didn't seem to have the intention to look at it. The two of them stared at each other, threatening each other with their fiercest eyes. From Atsu's point of view, it seemed that these two humans were angrily competing whose eyes could stare wider and whose eyes could last longer without blinking. Atsu suddenly felt a little embarrassed. It awkwardly closed its mouth and swallowed its saliva. Then, looking at the two people who were staring at each other, it decided to help its master. Woof woof, woof 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 woof. The black dog suddenly roared. Then, it jumped up and opened its big mouth to bite down on White Lotus's face. Lu Chen and White Lotus, who were confronting each other and trying to overwhelm each other's imposing manner, were startled at the same time. White Lotus cried out in alarm and subconsciously leaned to the side. But Atsu was very close to her, so how could she dodge in such a hurry? In a moment of desperation, White Lotus's complexion suddenly darkened. Her bound wrists suddenly leaned against her chest as if she had grabbed something. On the side, Lu Chen's heart stirred. He hastily shouted, "Atsu, don't act recklessly." For a proud daughter of heaven like White Lotus, no matter how she behaved in private, she was, after all, the daughter of an influential family in Kunwa City. Moreover, she was destined to become Hakushin Jinkuin's disciple. It would be strange if a person with such an identity didn't have any life-saving trump cards. But in that split second, Atsu's body paused for a moment. All of a sudden, an emerald green light shone out from White Lotus's chest and fell on Atsu's body. Atsu's body suddenly stopped in midair. It didn't go up nor go down, just hovering in the air a few feet above the ground. The inexplicable black dog was somewhat puzzled and afraid. Its ferocious appearance disappeared, and it looked around for a moment before barking at Lu Chen. Lu Chen's complexion changed when the green light shot out, but then he felt that the power within it wasn't fierce and it didn't have any killing intent, so his expression relaxed a little. At this moment, he shook his head and no longer cared about Atsu. Instead, he turned to White Lotus and said, "I don't care what you think. In short, from the beginning, I didn't take the initiative to cause trouble for you. Since both of us have some unspeakable secrets, I think we might as well shake hands and make up. What do you think?" White Lotus's pair of bright eyes stared at Lu Chen, as if trying to see through the heart of the man in front of her. After a moment, she suddenly sneered and said, "Don't just say nice things, let me go first." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Of course, but with your life-saving skills, this bit of rope shouldn't be able to trap you." White Lotus smiled and said, "Uncle, I can't tell, you're almost a demon." As she said that, the green light in front of her suddenly flashed, and Atsu was bounced out and fell on the ground beside the bed. Then the green light slightly sank, flashed past her hands and feet, and the ropes immediately broke. White Lotus rubbed her wrist and sat up, then looked at Lu Chen with a smile that was not a smile and said, "Then let's have a good chat now." Lu Chen looked at the green light that was still flashing incessantly in front of her chest, nodded and said, "Sure, but you put this thing away first." White Lotus snorted and said, "I'll put it away, who knows if you will suddenly get greedy and try to harm me again." Lu Chen said, "If I want to harm you, just now when you weren't awake, I have already done it countless times." White Lotus's cheeks turned slightly red, glared at him and said, "Already so old, fighting with a little girl like me and still using underhanded methods to plot against me, don't you have any shame?" Lu Chen closed his eyes, shook his head and pretended not to hear. After a sigh, he said, "Quickly put it away." White Lotus took a deep breath, turned her wrist, the green light flashed and slowly retracted back into her palm. Lu Chen looked at the green light with some curiosity and said, "I have never heard of such a treasure before, it seems to be incomparably rich in wood spiritual qi, is it some kind of wood heavenly treasure?" White Lotus didn't pay attention to him, probably because she didn't want to reveal the secret. The green light in her palm flickered, wavering non-stop. Lu Chen waited for a while, but saw that the green light didn't seem to retract much. He couldn't help but said, "Hey, do you still want to talk or not? Why did you take so long to retract this thing?" Before he finished speaking, he suddenly heard White Lotus cry out in alarm. Her face instantly turned pale, and she said involuntarily, "No, why can't I control it?" Lu Chen's heart jumped. He suddenly looked up, only to see that the green light suddenly burst out in White Lotus's palm. The light was so bright that he could even faintly hear a terrifying whistling sound, like a violent wind passing by. After a moment, a green light suddenly rushed out, like a sharp sword. It directly pierced into Lu Chen's heart. Chapter 105. Lu Chen's first reaction was that this little girl, White Lotus, was really vicious and ruthless, not forgetting to silence people at all times. This kind of ferocious temperament, it was really the first time he had seen in his life. Most likely even the evil faction people could not compare to her. But in that split second, he saw that White Lotus's face was indeed filled with fear, and her entire body was suddenly wrapped by the bright green light, and then inexplicably floated up, letting out a scream. The green light that tore through the air was like an unstoppable tidal wave. Its speed was as fast as lightning, and it instantly filled the small house. Lu Chen had almost no time to react. With a loud bang, the emerald green light beam that seemed to be solid heavily hit his chest. Lu Chen's entire body shook, a muffled sound, his entire body flew out, hit the wall behind him, a trace of blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth. But very quickly, he seemed to feel something, his expression changed greatly, looked down at his chest. That emerald green light beam shone straight on his chest, in the depths of the light, to be exact, in his chest cavity, in his heart where blood was boiling, a gentle white light, in that intense green light, quietly emitted out, like in a vast sea of raging waves, there was a pure white flower towering majestically. But in the next moment, all the green light suddenly became 30% more intense, as if it had been stimulated by something. It expanded crazily and surged toward Lu Chen's chest from all directions. Wherever the light passed, the tables, chairs, and beds all floated up, and then were twisted and broken by a violent force. The room was in a mess, and even the surrounding walls were trembling slightly. It looked like the room was about to collapse. Lu Chen felt as if all the blood and flesh in his body were boiling. His face contorted as he howled in pain. He suddenly raised his head and roared at the White Lotus in front of him, "Quickly suppress this light, or we'll all die." But after he shouted, he found that the girl in front of him, White Lotus, was still floating in mid-air, but her black hair was fluttering, and her eyes were closed. He did not know when she had fainted. Not far from her, the black dog was also swept up by the strange green light. It spun around in the air and barked a few times in panic. Suddenly, its head tilted to one side and it seemed to have lost consciousness. The surging power was like a tide, crazily surging towards Lu Chen. In that instant, Lu Chen felt as if his entire body was about to fall apart. At this critical moment, he forcefully endured the intense pain, suddenly gritted his teeth and with a low growl, he desperately used his hand to press against his chest. The gentle light in the depths of the green light seemed to be flickering in his palm, wind and fingertips. In the next moment, all the power suddenly came to a halt. It was as if the world had gone silent and time had frozen. The green light was like solidified green ice, flashing a strange light in the air. The man and the dog, who were floating in the air, were frozen for a moment. Then, after that moment, everything disappeared with a loud bang. The light dissipated with a roar, the figure disappeared into thin air, everything returned to nothingness. In the small hut, like a whirlwind sweeping away the clouds, everything disappeared. Green light, Lu Chen, White Lotus and even Atsu, in the blink of an eye, all disappeared. Only the garbage fragments that were originally blown into the air suddenly lost their support, and then like rain, they fell to the ground, a mess. After an unknown period of time, Lu Chen suddenly felt a warm and moist feeling on his face. He shook his head, feeling that his eyes and ears had not calmed down, it was still a mess. He closed his eyes and rested for a while, that strange feeling slowly receded, and then he opened his eyes. A tongue licked him next to him, a low whining sound came, it was Atsu's voice. Lu Chen took a deep breath, smiled at Atsu, and then sat up. When his body was only halfway up, he sucked in a breath of cold air, and almost fell down again. He quickly used his hands to support himself on the ground, and only then did he stabilize his body. At this moment, he only felt a strong pain coming from many parts of his body, especially his chest, which was the most uncomfortable. He touched the position of his chest with his hand, but found that there was actually no wound there. It seemed that the feeling just now was just an illusion. Lu Chen calmed himself down, then turned his head to look around. At this moment, he was in the mysterious tree hole-like space that he entered a long time ago. The ancient and mottled tree wall stood silently with the misty green air, and in the center of this tree hole, the puddle was still there. The water was clear and transparent, but it was no longer full of vitality. If one took a closer look, they would notice that there was a tiny and dark shadow hiding in the clear water somewhere in the depths of the water. It was like a dark flame, quietly burning. On the other side of the puddle, there was another petite figure lying on the ground 3 feet away. It was White Lotus. But at this moment, she was lying there with her eyes closed, her face slightly pale, and she was motionless for a long time, as if she was still in a coma. Lu Chen frowned, withdrew his gaze, and glanced at Atsu beside him, only to find that both he and White Lotus did not seem to be in a good condition. Only Atsu did not know why, after the torment just now, at this moment, it seemed like nothing had happened, walking back and forth freely beside him, and at the same time, looking curiously at the small world in the tree hole that he had never seen before. It seems that you are the first to wake up. Lu Chen touched Atsu's head. Atsu grinned, and seemed to be in a good mood. Lu Chen smiled, then slowly stood up, and carefully examined his body. Except for some pain all over his body, there did not seem to be any particularly serious injuries, only then did he feel relieved. But at the same time, looking at the surrounding tree hole, he also frowned. This tree hole, especially the mysterious puddle in the tree hole, was the key to him being able to survive the incomparably vicious, black flame, curse. It was the strange surging vitality in the water that suppressed the terrible black flame again and again, including 10 years later when he made his last attempt against the black flame curse, once again maintaining his vitality. In the past 10 years, only he had entered this place, and only he knew about it, even old Ma knew nothing about it. This was because this mysterious tree hole was actually the mysterious and unfathomable seed he had obtained from the blazing heavenly light during the Battle of the Desolate Valley back then. This seed was undoubtedly extremely important. Not to mention anything else, just by looking at the God-vanquishing curse formation that the devil cult cast back then, it used this strange seed as the core weight, and thus caused a phenomenon of heaven and earth, attracting and controlling unimaginable power of heaven and earth. One could tell how powerful it was. At the end of the Battle of the Desolate Valley, He Lang had obtained it. Then, under some strange circumstances, the seed had actually silently hidden itself in his body. To be precise, it had somehow penetrated deep into his heart. It was also from then on that the seed seemed to have merged with Lu Chen, and Lu Chen soon discovered that there was another strange space in this seemingly small seed, and he could actually enter and exit this mysterious tree hole in that feeling of flesh and blood connection. At the same time, he found the life-saving spiritual water of life in the tree hole. Over the past 10 years, it was all thanks to this seed and the mysterious tree hole that Lu Chen was able to barely survive, even though he had still endured unimaginable pain along the way. However, when he fought against the Black Flame Curse in Qingshitang village, he was lucky to survive, but he had already used up all the spiritual water of life. From then on, he rarely entered this mysterious tree hole. This was because in the past 10 years, he had of course explored this tree hole countless times. Every inch of the ground, every inch of the tree bark, including the hazy green gas, he had carefully explored it all. However, the disappointing thing was that apart from the amazing spiritual water of life in the puddle, he had not found anything else in this tree hole. It seemed like this was just a space that contained the spiritual water of life. Even so, it was actually quite amazing. Lu Chen was not a greedy person, so after his fruitless exploration, he did not continue. Until today, when the green light suddenly brought him, White Lotus, and Atsu into this place. Green light. Lu Chen suddenly raised his eyebrows and suddenly turned around, his eyes bright as he looked at White Lotus, who was still unconscious on the ground. Walking around the puddle, Lu Chen slowly walked to White Lotus's side and then squatted down. His gaze lingered on White Lotus's young but beautiful face for a moment. She was still unconscious and looked like she was asleep. At this moment, she was so quiet that she was like an ordinary girl. The inexplicable fragrance of innocence was like a flower that had just bloomed, and there was a breathtaking beauty about her. Some of her black hair slid down from her temples and rested on her gentle and fair cheeks. The little girl seemed to be dreaming of something. There was no longer any pain, anger, or viciousness on her face. The corners of her mouth were slightly pursed, as if she was smiling. That smile was so sweet. Could it be that she was dreaming of the person she loved the most? Lu Chen had never seen a person's temperament change so much when they were asleep. However, he quickly thought of something else. When White Lotus was awake in front of others, she seemed to have the temperament of a cold fairy. This little 10-year-old girl, how could she have so many different faces? Which one was the real one? Lu Chen silently stared at her beautiful face for a moment, then his gaze moved down to White Lotus's chest. Under the corner of her clothes, there was a soft but green radiance quietly flashing. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.